the worst thing Christianity does to itself is the heresy hunting. And everyone who has even the slightest divergence of belief are all heretics and going to hell.
Yeah.
And it's like that old axiom of what you fight, you strengthen, right?
I think a lot of us self-select into quietness because we know what it costs to speak up. Like to say, I no longer believe this. Knowing that the people who love me, are they even still going to love me if I don't believe the right things anymore? It can be really terrifying to actually say what you're thinking out loud and actually deal with the ramifications. When I walked away from that, I lost my livelihood. I lost my calling. I lost that community that believed that I was called by God to lead them. You know, like the things that it cost me to do this, it wasn't nothing, but I'm so glad I did in retrospect because like I felt like I could be honest with myself.
Every Christian conversion I've ever seen is you induce somebody into a fear state. You say, hey, look, if you don't join our club or convert to Christianity, you're going to burn in hell forever. Do you really want a religion full of psychological captives?
Yeah.
And so I asked myself, like, what's the cognitive dissonance here? Why are so many people willing to hold such fallacies in their belief system and it doesn't bother them like it bothered you or it bothered me? Welcome to the Jesus Way podcast, where we explore the true gospel teachings of Yeshua the Nazarene, and we invite you to follow the way with us. Shalom Alachem, peace be with you, and welcome back to the Jesus Way podcast, my friends. I'm very excited for today's episode with a new guest on the show who we haven't had on before. That's been on my radar for probably close to half a year, whose name is CJ Cornthwaite, who is a PhD in Christian origins, and I believe a master's in theology as well. CJ and I have, one of the reasons I was really drawn to watching some of CJ's content is that he does really, really good work, I think, in the area of deconstruction from Christianity. Because like myself, CJ grew up in Christendom and obviously was training to be a biblical scholar and kind of walked down that path and then had an awakening out of Christian fundamentalism, very much like myself. So what we're going to talk about today is just the process of deconstruction. And I think even we might touch on some of the deeper nuances of deconstruction, in that some of these rigid dogmatic beliefs that are really based in fear of, hey, if you don't believe this set of beliefs, you're going to face the worst imaginable consequence and this kind of thing. That even these ideas that we acknowledge as silly and contradictory and illogical can still sort of hang on in a weird way in the subconscious and cause, whether it's guilt or existential fear. And that's one of the reasons why we do this podcast and talk about the Jesus way. And so I think CJ has a lot of value to offer us in this conversation. So first of all, brother, thank you so much for joining the show and welcome to the Jesus Way podcast.
Thank you for having me. I'm really excited to be here. I love your take on all this stuff. I've listened to a lot of your podcasts. I've been a fan of yours for a while too now. So I'm really glad we can have this conversation.
Epic, man. As am I. And we were talking over email a little bit, and you had mentioned you'd watched a number of the Jesus Way podcast episodes. So before I jump in to kind of get your personal story of deconstruction, I would love to hear your take really quickly on the Jesus Way philosophy itself of, first of all, do you feel like you understand the overall message that we're trying to put forward to the world here? And what are your thoughts as somebody who's educated at a PhD level in biblical studies? Do you kind of agree with the idea that what Christianity today teaches is kind of a far cry from what the historical Yeshua probably taught?
I do agree with that. I think like if we really got into it, we'd probably have some differences in how we look at things. But I definitely appreciate the way that you're trying to get back to the actual social context of, you know, who Jesus would have been, what would have been the shaping influences on him, whether that's looking at, you know, the Essenes and the Dead Sea Scrolls, whether that's looking at some of the quote unquote Jewish Christian literature. So I love the nuance you're bringing to the conversation. I think that's really important. And I think as you've kind of referenced, like a lot of what we get of Christianity comes from, you know, orthodoxy that developed from the second to it's developing still, but a lot of what I critique in my channel is the main kind of thrust of orthodoxy that developed especially between like the 2nd and the 4th centuries and became the Christianity we all know and think is like the oxygen. And really there's a lot of different ways to look at Jesus and his teaching. So I love that about what you're doing. I think that's super valuable to people. And especially, like, we can get into this too, but coming out of fundamentalism, coming out of like a more extreme version of Christianity that you kind of live in a certain type of box,
Yeah.
and realizing this tradition is still valuable to me. I want to still see something in it and get something out of it, but I don't want to live in this box anymore. Like, I want to take the chains off. And going back and looking at Jesus and seeing different things you might not have seen and understanding the tradition in a different way, I think that's awesome. So I really do love what you're doing. I think you're providing a lot of value for people. And the other thing is, like, I hang out with a lot of atheists online since I've been doing this. I love, I like talking to atheists. I don't mind. Like, I find we're all just we're all just exploring the nuances of this tradition and the doubts that we all have, So I think that's really valuable. But I also really love that you're doing this from a more of a like spiritual perspective and exploring spirituality again through the teachings of Jesus. So yeah, all that to say, I love what you're doing. Lots of great episodes. I listened to your episode of Tabor just the other day, so I love the historical context he's providing too, and so lots of good stuff.
Yeah, man. Tabor is an absolute legend, and I'm so grateful to have his friendship, and I learned so much from him, man, every time we speak. But yeah, thank you for sharing that. And I think, again, that's why you add such a great kind of dynamic, because myself, Cameron Waters, James Benefico, kind of the usual host of this podcast, we study, there's actually a group of about 10 of us in a text thread. We're trying to sort of like form like a super team of Nazarene researchers on early Jewish Christianity. And there's certain people that have like channels on YouTube that specialize in this: David Natsori, Chris Sartain. So we've all kind of teamed up to really put our brains together to do the research on this topic, which is fun. But where you really bring a new area of expertise is Christian origins, which was your PhD. But your Christian origins is a bit different than ours, which is Jewish Christianity. But your specialty was really more in the Gentile Christian tradition. And that's why I really have enjoyed watching your videos, because one of the most interesting topics to me in biblical studies or New Testament studies is this idea of how Jesus became God, right? A la Bart Ehrman and many others, and just kind of the paganization of Jesus. And I think it makes a lot of sense to me that the teachings of Yeshua, which were about repentance, humility before God, devotion to God, loving your neighbor, forgiving, not judging, these are the clear salvation teachings of Jesus. And when you look at that and you look at the Greco-Roman world, you kind of say, like, there's just no way Jesus's original message would have survived in the Greco-Roman world of that day, not being paganized and having these Greek ideas added into it. So it's not like a surprise that this happened and that Jesus was more and more kind of elevated to a deity, like, all the demigods of the Greco-Roman tradition. But it nevertheless does represent a deviation from the original Christian tradition, at least I believe and feel strongly, that it wasn't about confessing and believing and the Nicene Creed and Trinitarianism and the virgin birth. I think a lot of that stuff would have been abhorrent to probably Yeshua and the Jewish Christians that followed him. And so I'm curious if your studies have kind of given you a similar viewpoint of like, it just makes practical sense that this would have been the outcome of the first century Jesus movement.
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, how to approach this? I find as you know, I studied a lot of diaspora Judaism.
Yes.
And when I study what Jews were doing in diaspora, it does look different from what was happening in Judea and Palestine. I mean, one of my MA thesis was about a guy named Philo in Alexandria. And
cool.
Philo is a Jewish philosopher, but he's really, really steeped in Greek philosophy.
Yeah.
Really incredible guy. Like, if you read his teachings, like, it aligns a lot with like Middle Stoicism, Middle Platonism.
Yeah, Philo's got
terms we use now. So we use these kind of terms to talk about it now. But if you look at what he's doing as like a Jew in diaspora, he's just trying to make sense of his world, So it is it is universalizing. Like, they would say things like, oh, like Plato borrowed from Moses, and like they're using their own tradition and not really like, even, I don't know if it's what we would call a religious tradition. Like they use the word ancestral laws, patroi and nomoi in Greek, to mean like our kind of ethnic orientation, but then they try to understand the world around them. So I think it's like one of the important things to understand about Christianity too, and this is what Paul does as well, and we can talk about like the effect of Paul if you want later. But it's kind of a universalizing message, you know, and it's an attempt to like see for Christianity the message of Jesus, or for Philo like to understand Judaism, or to understand like his Judean identity in a world where there's a lot of different people in contact. And I think that's like an important context to understand, that kind of gave rise to a universalizing Christianity that ultimately won. And then the other thing is like we get at this historical Jesus, and you know, you're talking about Jewish Christianity, but like as you know, a lot of that a lot of that way of thinking, way of life would have been decimated by the Romans and by the
Yeah.
events of the first century. So it's yeah, I guess I'm maybe going off on a tangent here, but I love the idea of getting back to some of that like authentic like Christianity. I'm also like, as a historian, I'm cautious about wondering if anything that we get is authentic, you know, like I think we're
Totally. Yeah.
always doing
Totally
work
agree.
of interpretation and trying to understand. But that being said, I think creating this world that you can do when you know, like you're doing, studying like what we have of Jewish Christian writings or the Dead Sea Scrolls, like studying some of this stuff and trying to get a sense of like what would somebody in this world have looked like, you definitely get a very different view from, like, as you say, like the universalizing demigod.
Yeah.
And you know, there, it's very unlikely. The other thing, I mean, I see all the time, I was thinking of this yesterday because I was somebody was quoting the New Testament to me and talking about Pilate, and you know, the trial of Jesus, Pilate is this like relatively benevolent guy
Super
who's
nice
like,
guy.
I find no fault in him, and what is true, you know, all this kind of stuff. They have these nice kind of, it's like very hard for me to believe a first century, you know, this kind of narrative of like the Romans were not that bad, which is what you get in the Gospels, right?
Right.
Like
And they were kind of nice.
Jesus is
Yeah.
crucified for being a rebel, but apparently like he didn't do anything worth rebelling. If you read the Gospels, he's actually kind of nice to the Romans. So
Yeah. It
you
was those
you
dirty
have to
Jews that really got him.
exactly. Yeah,
Yeah.
that's like you get these supersessionist type of tropes that start to come in, and like I don't think people realize this, that like even the Gospels, which a lot of people will say like, these are eyewitness earliest accounts, they've already been perverted in that way to lose that thread, as you're saying, of like what it actually would have looked like for somebody like Jesus in Galilee or in Judea in the first century. It would have been a very different world. So yeah,
Yeah.
I mean, I think what you're saying is exactly right. Like you have to kind of rethink what actually would have been true of the historical Jesus. We can ask like, there's the big historiographical question is always like, how much can we actually get at the historical Jesus,
Yeah.
which a lot of scholars have, you know, put a lot of ink towards. But yeah, exactly. It's we need to ask these questions. So.
Yeah. Yeah. We raised a lot of good points there. And one of them that I don't think we've talked about on this podcast is the idea that Jesus was speaking to Jews as a Jew, and in the beginning, Christianity, Jewish Christianity, was really just kind of considered a sect of Judaism for a few decades. And
Yeah.
then I think it's the letter from Trajan or Philo to Trajan. Am I getting that right? Where he sort of classifies Christians as something other than the Jews, at least for the first time we have in writing, and says, yeah, treat these Christians, you know, get them in line, and we don't want this movement to spread and stuff. And so I think it's super interesting to consider the historicity of the Gospels from that light, because, you know, like one of the things you always hear scholars discuss is the enormous difference between the Synoptics and John. And it's like only one of these depictions of Jesus can be historically accurate. Maybe neither of them are, but like they can't both be, is the idea. Either the
Yeah.
Synoptics Jesus is the more historically accurate one, or John's Jesus, but it's not both. And I think it's just so interesting when you study the Greek literature, early Greek literature around the Christian movement, because you get things like the letter from Justin Martyr. I can't remember who he's writing to, but you'll know when he goes into, he's basically defending their theology and saying, hey, why are you guys persecuting us for saying that Jesus was the pre-existent Logos? We're just believing all the same things you guys believe about Apollos and Perseus, right? And he's actually using pagan mythology to steelman Christian theology. And it's like, how is that not a red herring for the Christian movement, you know?
Yeah, yeah. There's a lot there. I think so. The letter, that Philo didn't write about the Christians. I think I'm having a brain
Or
fart. Who
Pliny?
wrote
I think
to
it's Pliny.
Pliny? Yeah, that's it, Pliny.
That's
Yeah.
right. That's right.
So yeah, yeah. But Philo actually wrote an important letter as well about Jewish persecution in Alexandria. But there's definitely a lot going on. Like there's a lot to kind of try to understand what's happening in this context. So yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, there's no way you can talk about biblical history or any of these topics without just going off on so many rabbit trails, because
Yeah,
everything is
that's
kind of
right.
its own rabbit trail in this
Yeah,
field, which is
yeah,
what makes it exciting as well. But we
yeah,
can nerd out a little bit later in the podcast, after we get
yeah.
through
Sure.
the sort of meat and bones of today's discussion, which is just about deconstructing from Christian fundamentalism. So,
Hmm.
can you just, I've heard your story on YouTube a number of times, but can you just kind of walk us through your personal story of your journey out of fundamentalist Christianity to where you are today? Because I'd love to hear, or I'd love for the audience to hear rather. Um, we talk a lot about deconstructing from religion because that's sort of my backstory, as I said. And
Hmm.
I'll share with you kind of my deconstruction process after you share yours, because I think we have a
Yeah.
lot of crossover. But yeah, just walk us through your journey of, being heading towards biblical scholarship as your profession, and then what was it along the way that started to wake you up from those beliefs?
Well, yeah, I was like, I think we had similar but different backgrounds because it sounds like you had a really Pentecostal background, and my background was a lot more like fundamentalist, rigid, like almost like it wasn't even Baptist. I was a
Yeah.
denomination called Plymouth Brethren, which is pretty small.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
yeah,
I
so
didn't
they
know
didn't
that.
believe
That's
like,
fascinating.
yeah, it's a weird denomination. It's lay led. They don't believe in pastors. So they believe every
Wow.
man, and yes, it is only men. They believe every man has the responsibility to preach. So I was, reading the Bible, preaching from the King James version at a fairly young
Wow.
age. Um, so I was that kid. I mean, I grew up in it. I believed it with all my heart. I went all in. I had my own little salvation experience at the age of 7, as most evangelicals have something like that in their story, right? So yeah, I mean, I got into camp ministry. I was playing in a metal band, and we were going to try and convert people by playing Christian metal at bars. We did that for a while. So,
I was in a
like
punk
it
rock
was.
band.
Were you? Oh, geez, there
Yeah.
you go. Yeah. What did you play?
We were called Zero to Hero. I was the lead
Nice.
guitarist and singer. I was my major was in worship music. I got a bachelor's
Okay,
in
yeah,
music and
right.
theology, and was a worship leader for a year.
I think I actually knew that. Right. So
Yeah.
yeah, so I'm a musician too. I play
Oh,
guitar,
nice.
drums, a few different things. So yeah, I mean, like anything else that I had, any other talent I had, it was for God, right? So I was
Right, of
trying to find
course.
ways to use it and trying to convert people. So that was the story of my life. I mean, I was playing in a metal band and attending this Baptist church, and they came to me. I think I was 19, and they came to me and they said, "We think that you are being called by God to be our youth pastor." And so by this point, I'm in a church that did have pastors. So, as a 19-year-old, kind of
Wow.
confused about the world and where I'm supposed to go. And like, this is a pretty powerful calling, and it's a pretty, like, having older people tell you, like, God is calling you, just like, holy crap, there must be something to this. God must be calling me.
Yeah.
So, I thought about it for a while, and I finally said, okay. And I spent, I think, almost 10 years as a youth pastor in that Baptist church. Um, so
Wow.
that wasn't, I mean, I was like sold out. I was converting kids, which we could talk about, but I don't love that I did that. But like, that was the world I was in, right? As you try
Yeah,
to convert
absolutely.
children to this and try to like get more notches on that spiritual belt. Um, so I was very much like into fundamentalism. And I was even one of those kind of annoying people. I'd start to get into apologetics and argue with people. And I was just convinced my world was right. And
Yeah.
I didn't have much. I think about this a lot more now. I didn't think about it at the time. I wish I had, but I didn't realize the extent to which, like, as a male, even as a white male, but especially just as a male in this world, as a heterosexual male, like, it was easy for me to find my calling in a community that literally existed, and I benefited a lot from it, and we didn't always see the people on the margins. But I fought for it. I was the hardcore fundamentalist. And then I decided that I was going to, that maybe God was calling me into like a more formal ministry. And to do more formal ministry, I thought, well, I should have a Master of Divinity, which is the degree for being a pastor,
Mhm.
in a lot of churches, in a lot of church context. So there was a seminary in my town that was Anglican, and I was, as I said, Baptist. We didn't have like a fundamentalist seminary in my town, but I thought, well, I'll go. And people encourage me with this too. They're like, it's just a piece of paper. Your MDiv is just like, you're already doing God's work. You already know what you need to know.
It's
Like, of
just a
course, my
formality.
arrogance, right? Exactly. Like, I know everything I'm ever going to need to know about this. It's just a
Yeah.
formality. So, yeah, it's awful now that I thought about that, to look at education as just like, I just need the paper, but I have nothing to learn, kind of thing, right? But
Yeah.
pretty indicative of how a young fundamentalist approaches the world. Like, I already know the truth. I just need the paper.
It's
Um,
so true, bro.
Yeah. So anyway, so I went and started studying, and I think that's where the cracks started to really form. There was the only thing really like at youth group that had happened. I will say, like, I had gay kids in my youth group, and there was one little like problem there in my armor, because it was pretty clear to me that some of these kids from a young age were gay, and like they weren't choosing it, they weren't, like it.
Yep.
So that already like complicated the way that I was. But that was like almost the only thing. Like otherwise, I had a pretty nice little bubble that I was living in.
Hmm.
But yeah, I mean, seminary just exploded it. Like it really, coming to the Bible, seeing, I mean, I think one of the most popular videos I've ever done was one of the first ones I did, and it was just about contradictions in the Bible. And
Hmm.
today I don't care about contradictions in the Bible. It doesn't matter to me in the least. But
Yeah.
at the time, coming to it as like the Bible has no contradictions. I know that. I'm ready to fight against anybody who thinks there are. I can argue them all. And just coming to the point, it was actually the Judas contradiction. I was just like, how
Yeah.
did Judas Iscariot die? Two very different stories
You do
between
such a great job, by the way, of breaking that one down. Can you give us like a quick
thanks.
synopsis for the audience?
Yeah, well, so you basically get two stories. One is in Matthew, one is in Acts. The Acts one is very short, but there's still enough details that when you compare the two, it's like these don't actually line up. So in one, Judas basically feels remorse, goes and gives the money back, and then goes out and hangs himself. And in the other one, in Acts, Judas goes and buys a field with the money. You don't get any sense that he, showed remorse. And you get this story about him like falling somehow in the field and dying. So in on my channel, I did a video where I kind of pulled apart like some of the traditions around this and what I think is happening. But I mean, either way you look at it, even just reading the biblical text, like there is a contradiction there, and it's not even just how did Judas die. It's like, did he feel remorse? Did he give the money back? Did he buy the field
Yeah.
with the
Who bought
money?
the
Like,
field?
so exactly, yeah. So and like now, who cares? Like it really doesn't matter. But
Yeah,
there's still people
totally.
on that video. There's still people on that video being like, no, you can harmonize this. You just don't want to see the truth. It's like, well, okay. Like, I
Yeah.
can't convince you if you're not willing to see the truth. But it was a really critical moment. I think I mentioned too on my channel that learning like documentary hypothesis and reading Genesis in Hebrew, and like starting to see that there were different sources behind the Hebrew Bible was really important. And that was really
Hmm.
obvious to me. Once I saw it, I was like, oh yeah, like Genesis
Oh,
1 and
like
2 are obviously two different stories, right? That are being
documentary
kind of,
hypothesis.
yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
So it was that kind of stuff like that started to pick away. So I think like one of the things I talk about now is spirituality is like I never needed to have that extreme version of the Bible. And one of the problems with that form of fundamentalism that I've said before is like it makes Christianity falsifiable. Because if you're going to have to believe the Bible is inerrant to be a Christian, as soon as the Bible's not inerrant, you can't be a Christian anymore. And like that's dumb. I
Right.
wish I didn't have that, but I did have that. So that's where the cracks in the armor really started. I got really kind of defensive and a lot more. I think for a while I just got angrier and I just fought harder, and it was like I'm not going to see this. And
Yeah.
I still remember. I've actually never told this story, but I still remember the exact moment I knew I didn't want to be an evangelical anymore, and it was actually
Wow.
like very poetically on the shores of the Sea of Galilee because
No
I,
way.
yeah, it was like
That's
almost
super
like
epic, man.
almost a spiritual experience.
Yeah.
So many things. I was there I went on an archaeological dig in the city of Tiberias, which is on the Sea of Galilee. So I was there like
Oh, that's
digging,
fun.
but we had this day off from the dig, and I just went down to the beach. So I was like sitting on the beach in Tiberias, and there's Israelis all around me, like swimming, doing their thing in the beach. And then the there was this little family that came down, and they were Muslims, and basically all of the Israelis just like picked up and left, and it was just me on the beach now with this little family and this little Muslim boy who was like 4 or 5 splashing in the water. They're so happy. And so I was watching this, and I'm like, this is really sad that these groups of people hate each other that much that like they don't want to be near each other, right? So I was sitting with that, and as I was watching, I had this like I could hear this hymn, and it was the weirdest thing. I could hear it like "We Are Climbing Jacob's Ladder." I don't know if you know that. It's like an old hymn, but
I've heard it. Yeah.
um, I could hear it, and I was like, I can't be hearing this hymn. I'm in Israel. Like, how? Where is this? Like, literally, I'm literally hearing it, not like in my mind. Like, I
Wow.
literally am hearing it. Like, where is this coming from? And I watched as this boat of like evangelical tourists just came out of nowhere and like putted across. So I'm watching this family play, and this boat goes like floating across in front of me on the Sea of Galilee, and it's full of probably American, maybe Canadian, whatever, like Western
Yeah.
tourists. And they're there having this great time, like just celebrating and having like a worship experience on this boat. And I don't know what it was about that moment, but I was just like, I don't want to be those people anymore. Like, I don't want to be those people on the boat who are just so immune to like the reality of like what people are facing here, that I'm just so in my own little self-actualization, my own little bubble, my own little like
Yeah.
happy clappy world, that I can't actually see the pain that's right in front of me.
Mhm.
So that was like a weird, I've never told that story before, but it was just
Yeah.
a really
Wow.
weird experience. And I don't like, it might not even be that big of a deal for somebody, but it was just a moment in my mind that I was like, that's not me. I'm not going to be that person on the boat anymore. And I just like, from then
Wow.
on, I started kind of pulling back. So
Oh, you're like, man, I forgot how much I hate that song. I don't want to be a
yeah,
freaking
it's the
evangelical
worst
anymore.
song. Yeah. Yeah. No, Israel was a weird experience because, have you been? I don't know if
I
have
haven't,
you,
but it's on my bucket
you haven't.
list, top of the list.
Yeah. So it's it was weird in that, like, as an evangelical, you go in, and I was taught to think like the Catholics and the Orthodox, like none of these traditions are, real Christians, is kind of what I was taught to believe.
Right.
So going to like the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, which is like the traditional site of Jesus' burial, and seeing people like bowing down and, like touching things and touching themselves and kissing things, like all this like kind of ritual. I'm standing there as an evangelical and I'm just like, yeah, this is such BS. Like, you don't have the real thing. I have the
Yeah,
real thing,
totally.
like you're just full of crap. But seeing that evangelicals also do really weird things with that city and in that place, and like they're also there for their own self-actualization and very ignorant of what's going on around them. So anyway,
Yeah.
it was, that trip to Israel was really probably like the point where it took me a while to actually settle with the ramifications of what I decided, but I was just like, I don't want to be this person anymore. Like, this is not the world
Yeah.
I belong in anymore. Yeah.
It's funny what things can wake you up, isn't it?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, you never know.
Have you seen the famous 1980s movie Airplane?
No, I haven't.
Oh, darn it. Okay. Well, you told a story just now that reminded me of a scene from that movie of like Christians, Muslims, Jews kind of all judging each other. You're this evangelical being like, oh, look at these, I don't know, Jews, Muslims kissing and bowing and praying, like so stupid. Like, I eat the flesh and drink the blood of Christ. That's what's normal and right. And they're
Yeah.
thinking, oh, look at that weird blood drinker. Like, everyone has their own perspective and they all have the same conviction, I'm right and they're wrong. And so the scene in Airplane, most of the audience will probably know. There's like these nuns on the plane. It's a comedy from the 80s. And these guys are drinking and they offer the nun like a drink. And she's like, oh, like all offended. She's like, no, like I don't drink alcohol. And she turns away and she takes out a little straw and like snorts a line of Coke. It's like, oh, okay, so Coke is her thing, but not alcohol, right?
Oh,
It's
that's
like
funny.
that's kind of what it is, isn't it? Like, oh, you're such a heretic, and then like you go do
Yeah.
something that they think is incredibly heretical.
Yeah.
This is just the nature of religion, and that's why we have to approach everyone's beliefs with humility and
Yeah.
understanding. And I
Yeah.
think the worst thing Christianity does to itself is the heresy hunting. And
Mm.
everyone who has even the slightest divergence of belief from pick your denomination are all heretics and going to hell.
Yeah.
And it's like that old axiom of what you fight, you strengthen, right? If Christianity did what Jesus said they should do, which is, hey, they'll know you're my disciples, AKA Christians, they'll know you're Christians by your love for one another, then Christianity would be a religion that nobody has a problem with. If they could get rid of all the judgment and heresy hunting and stuff and just love people like Jesus taught, then we wouldn't have so many of the issues we have in the world today and the holy wars and whatnot. But when we get back to the original teachings of Yeshua, I think it also makes sense that, those are teachings that just, there's no way you can weaponize teachings like non-judgment and enemy love and forgiveness. You can't build armies on love your neighbor as yourself. It's not a very good war slogan. So you need heretics, you need in and out, you need good and evil, you need that duality. And I think that the sort of Hellenistic brand of Christianity that developed just suited those purposes. And so what's really struck me lately in my own studies, I started last year taking my MA in religious studies, and I'm taking
Yeah.
a class right now called Parables of Jesus. And
Mm.
you made a good point earlier about, we can't know for sure that any of these red letters are really like for sure what Jesus said. And I
Yeah, that's
totally
right.
agree.
Yeah.
Of course we can't know.
Yeah.
But there are some way, at least as a spiritual philosopher, I guess, um, especially when you look at the parables of Jesus.
Hmm.
Yeah, I can see people fabricating his kind of basic soteriology, like judge and you'll be judged, forgive and you'll be forgiven. The measure you give is the measure you'll get back. Many philosophers have taught similar things, but it's the parables that I think really, to me, validate that this was a real person who really was kind of a spiritual genius in a way and had a very
Mm.
unique message, or at least a unique way of delivering the message. And it comes mostly through the parables of Jesus that I think are really difficult, if not impossible, to convince me that some Joe Schmo who wants to invent a religion is going to make up all these incredible parables that are so
Mm.
deep and rich and have so much meaning to them. And when you study them from especially a Jewish context, it makes even more sense about the audience that was listening to Jesus and how they would have understood versus today, 21st century kind of Western mindset. And so
Mm.
that is why I have such a strong conviction, I guess, in the person of Yeshua and Yeshua's teachings, that I really do believe that Yeshua was trying to kind of lay out the way to God that very much was much more Jewish than it was Gentile, obviously. But he was a big fan of the law, right? Like this is one thing that's always struck me, man,
Mm.
is you could go to any Christian church on Sunday and ask a pastor, how do I attain eternal life? Like, what is it that gets me to heaven? And of course, Jesus's answer in all three synoptics was keep the commandments and
Mm.
list them, and finishes with love your neighbor as yourself. You do this, you do the whole law, it's all done. And you'll just absolutely never, under any circumstances, hear a Christian pastor say what Christ said when he was asked that
Mm.
question.
It's true. Yeah. Yeah.
And it never ceases to amaze me.
Yeah. No, that's a great point. I wanted to do a video at some point on like how to get saved in different ways in the New Testament or something, because it's like it really is like, you look at the letter of James, and I remember like trying to harmonize James, the faith without works is
Oh,
dead.
yeah.
So
It's a
James
tough
says
one.
like show me your yeah, like James basically says like show me your what does he say? Show me your faith, I'll show you my works. I forget exactly how he says it, but it's a famous thing. And like when I was growing up, people would try to harmonize that and they'd be like, well, that means like if you have real faith, there will be some works to show for it.
Right.
Like actually no, like James is pissed at Paul. Like he's pissed at
For
a
sure.
world where you're telling us like it's faith is enough, and we're trying to. The other one is Revelation. This is a famous one, you probably know about it too, but the letter to the seven churches in Revelation, where the one
Mhm.
letter it says like to those who say they are Jews but are not. And people have tried to read that different ways, but it's like, well, the most obvious way to read that is they say they're Jews and they're not. They're like
Yeah, yeah.
they call them, they're not doing, maybe not doing circumcision, not doing it following the Jewish law. So it's interesting to me, or like reading Luke, for example. Like I love Luke. Like Jesus almost
Me
becomes,
too.
it's not so much like Jewish, but Jesus is almost like a philosopher type sage in Luke, and
Mhm.
acts as well a little bit. So you get this really these different pictures of who this person was, and like as you say, like we've harmonized them into one thing and then control how people can read this book. But yeah, I mean, you start to pull those apart and you see a lot of interesting stuff. So you mentioned the parables. I also just love the sayings of Jesus. There was a minute at some point in my deconstruction when I was like, I think I was just an atheist agnostic. Like I didn't even know if I was ever going to come back. But I remember one day just wanting to know something true, and the words like ask and it shall be given to you, seek and you shall find, knock and the door
Matthew
will be
7
open to
7.
you. Such like thinking about that and being like, it has nothing to do with like the way that I was taught to be saved. But there's such a powerful message there. I think like the sayings
Yeah.
of Jesus to me are just so fascinating. And
Mhm.
again, like I could put on my skeptical historian hat and say like how many of these actually go back to the historical Jesus, but
Yeah.
like I think it is legitimate. Like the Bible is a religious text, and I think it is legitimate to read it for religious reasons and not just always as like a 20th century skeptical biblical scholar.
Mhm.
And I found a lot of nourishment from that. So it was like it was actually coming back to those words of Jesus, or even in my case as a fundamentalist, realizing that some of those quote unquote liberal Christians were actually more interested in Jesus than my fundamentalist community was. Like seeing at seminary and
Yeah.
seeing like these liberal Christians are actually talking about Jesus and what does Jesus want, and like Jesus wants us to take care of the poor, and Jesus what and I in like a fundamentalist context I would be told, well, that's the social gospel, we don't do that, we need to tell people they're going to hell, they need to get saved, that's all that matters, like
Yeah.
that's what, like your ticket to heaven, that's what matters. and seeing these liberal Christians and realizing like, geez, they're actually more interested in the teachings of Jesus than
I
the
found the
community I
same
came
thing.
from. It's like, so some of those things really start to open your eyes for sure to like
Yeah.
who this person actually was and the complexity of what's here.
Yeah. Yeah. Have you ever heard the famous Martin Luther quote on faith versus works, the Paul James
Like
conflict?
the Epistle of Straw one, or
No, it's a different one. It might be in the
oh,
same
okay,
segment, but it's the quote where Martin
no,
Luther
tell me.
says, "Many people sweat hard trying to reconcile." And then he lists the verses, Paul and James, faith and
Okay,
works. And he says, and something like, it's futile. They can't do it, type of thing. And it's like, wow, look at that. The father of Protestantism is looking at
yeah,
this back and forth between Paul and James and going, yeah, there's no way you can reconcile this. And he was like, and I side with Paul.
yeah,
And I find that fascinating too. It's like, yo, this is the brother of Jesus. It's like, there's
yeah,
literally
yeah,
never been a historical person who is more an accurate representation of what Yeshua probably believed and taught than his own brother, who was, as you know, his appointed successor. And yet, kind of the whole Gentile Christian tradition just really went hard towards the Paul end of the spectrum and
yeah,
kind of rejected James. And I think part of that is also because the Catholic Church pretends like it has this established tradition of the Apostle Peter. He traveled to Rome and he started this church, and every pope since Peter has been a successor of Peter. And this is the story you're told. And yet
mm,
scholars go, yeah, there's no actual proof of any of that. And
yeah,
when
that's
you look
right.
at the history
Yeah,
of what actually happened, you're like, there's no way Peter went to Rome to start a church when, what was it, 64 AD, I think, is when the riot kind of broke out, or 66,
mm,
between Rome and the Jews, and led to the destruction of the temple. And Eusebius, Hegesippus, and Epiphanius, I believe, all say that all the Nazarenes, the disciples of Jesus, all fled to Pella before the
yeah,
destruction of the temple because they were warned by Christ in a dream, they said. And I think Galatians is dated to like 50 or somewhere around there. So it's like we have Paul and Peter duking it out in the 50s. And then, so like, when did they become best friends and start a church together? It's like there's
mm,
really no credible ground to stand on there. It's all just kind of speculation. And so I think it makes sense then why the Catholic Church had to really marginalize James the Just, because he was the appointed successor of Jesus, which is attested to in many, many different documents we have, including Gospel of Thomas and others. And he led the Jerusalem Nazarene Church for like almost 3 decades before his execution. And so it's like, yeah, there's a totally different Jesus tradition apart from the Catholic one. It makes sense why they had to kind of tone down James and really elevate Paul. Because if you look too deep into James and that whole history, you realize, oh, James was actually the one that Jesus appointed and who led Jesus's church. Find that
mm,
amazing.
yeah. There's a lot there. Yeah, like the James is really interesting, and I have like I like I find the theory really compelling that James might even be sort of a commentary and like adaptation of Q. I'm not sure if you know
Oh, yeah, yeah,
this
yeah.
theory, but there's kind of a so you may see a trajectory there. So yeah, that's really a good point. I think too about though, like I almost have to, because we're talking about Paul and like there's this idea that Paul like stole Christianity.
Yeah.
Um, and I think like I don't know. I was
More
thinking about this
complicated
and
than
in
that.
yeah, like I was thinking a lot about how we approach this. And like I think in the first place, and this maybe comes back to like our modern experiences of this, is like everybody experiences Paul through the lens of a modern church who thinks they know what Paul said. Like we
Totally.
all experience Paul through this, like, well, he was just like basically like again, like reading that substitutionary atonement or like reading people like St. Anselm or Martin Luther or Calvin, like reading these people back into Paul's own writings
Yeah.
and thinking we've understood it.
It's
And I
problematic.
agree with yeah, like I totally agree with you in the terms of like the Catholic Church over time, like rewriting this history, especially like third, fourth, fifth, sixth centuries. Um, but yeah, it's interesting, like the actual figure of Paul, looking at what he did and how, like I was thinking of this in terms of like the collection for Jerusalem. I don't know, like in his letters, Paul talks about like having a collection for Jerusalem,
Yeah.
and he
Yeah.
specifically says like a collection for the poor in Jerusalem.
Hmm.
And it's like, well, who are the poor in Jerusalem? And it makes a lot of sense. Maybe like we can't prove this, but like thinking about Ebionim, which is like literally the poor, like, is that what he's collecting for? So like, how does this relationship work? Like there's such a lot of interesting connections there.
I know.
That don't, you know what I mean? Like there's still interesting questions there to ask about what that relationship looked like.
Yeah.
And then I think the other thing that's like important from a scholarly work is like the whole new perspective on Paul that occurred in the 20th century, that a lot of people looking at the writings of Paul and being like, well, Paul wasn't just about like the supersessionism of the Jews and that's gone and now we have like a new way. A lot of them are arguing like he's actually trying to bring Gentiles into the covenant and think about Judaism a little bit bigger. So there's so many, there's so many interesting questions about that relationship between Paul and the Jerusalem church. And I mean, we probably just don't know for a lot of it, but it is like, I am really curious to know what that actually looked like at the time. You get, conflicting accounts in Acts versus Paul's letters. And Galatians specifically, but yeah, I don't know. It's such an interesting question.
It is. It's such a fascinating subject to study. And I study it so heavily and read so many books and articles about this topic because it's just an endless fascination of like, how did this go so wrong? And a lot of it has to do with Paul, of course, but I sort of use the name Paul like I would use the name Matthew, Mark, Luke, or John. So, well, John says, but Matthew says. And like people think I'm referring to the actual historical person Matthew said. And it's like, oh, I'm sorry. No. It's like a biblical hermeneutical way of describing whoever wrote these gospels. We just call them Matthew, Mark, Luke, and John. Similar to Paul, it's like Paul's teachings have been so skewed and stretched and even bastardized in a lot of ways by the church that I say Paul, but I don't mean always like the historical person, but like Paulinism and what became of
like Pauline theology, basically. Yeah, that's fair.
Pauline
that's
theology.
Fair for sure. Yeah, that's fair. That's a good distinction too. Yeah, because it's interesting to like what I don't know if you know. There's this channel. It's called Patristica. I talk about it a lot because I think what they're doing is really cool. But they're using data science. Yeah, they're doing like data science stuff, and they're saying like we can actually from data science tell that there are probably letters behind the letters of Paul. Like there are more original letters that were added to as these letters were passed on, and like sort of a veneer of like later orthodoxy is put over them. So there's like some of these types of questions. It's like, man, we see, I like to your point, and I do agree with your point, like what we get of early Christianity has been very carefully constructed for us by the people who preserved our sources and the people who defined orthodoxy and the people who wrote the Nicene Creed and the people who determined the canon. And we look back through that window they've given us, and it's a very murky window, to see what are we actually looking at here. So I think the historical Paul is an interesting question, but I take your point about Paulinism for sure. Yeah.
One of the most interesting things about Paul I've been learning recently, because I'll even watch back videos from me a year ago talking about Paul, some topic about Paul, and I'll be like, I actually don't think that anymore. I actually think it's a little more nuanced than that. And like my views are evolved so much, right? Which is just kind of par for the course in biblical studies. But one of the most interesting things that Tabor put me onto is the connection between Paul and the Dead Sea Scrolls. That Paul is the only person in the New Testament who uses a number of Qumranisms. One of them is sons of light, sons of darkness. That terminology for this is the way the Essene sectarian group, the Ebionim, right? That they were seeing, it was their eschatology of it. We're in the last days. There's going to be this big battle between the sons of light and the sons of darkness. Sons of light are going to win. God's kingdom will come. That's what they believed. And you have Paul using that terminology. And my favorite scholar to study on Jewish Christianity is Hugh Schonfield. He has so many amazing texts on Jewish Christianity. He was a real expert in this field. And he has, I have it saved in my notes, but he has a list of all the different Qumranisms and connections to the Dead Sea Scroll group from the mouth of Paul. And I think that that's actually, if you could really steelman that and say, look, there's no way you can explain why Paul would be using all of this language that is found absolutely nowhere else, anywhere, but the Dead Sea Scrolls, that you can say he had no affiliation with that group. It's like, of course he did, right? How else would he have gotten these ideas? And in Acts, although we know Acts is very different than kind of Paul's writings in history, it does say that Paul spent about 3 years in Damascus. And we know with the Damascus document, there's a lot of scholars who believe that Damascus was probably like an HQ for the Essenes or whatever their name was, Ebionim, Nazarene, who knows. But this kind of ascetic sectarian group that had split off from orthodoxy and was living out in the Dead Sea area. If you could prove that Paul spent time with that group, to me, that would be the final nail in the coffin. And I think there's already plenty of nails in this
It'll
coffin.
drive you crazy though. Yeah, no, I hear you. But it's the same with like John the Baptist, or Jesus for that matter.
Right,
Like
right.
it's just so hard to establish these connections but you're right in terms of like the genealogy of that kind of those ideas. I was going to ask, so you subscribe to the Dead Sea Scrolls being all of Qumran origin and not like, the Jerusalem archive theory that maybe these were taken from Jerusalem during the...
And I definitely ascribe to the Jerusalem archives theory. What I think
Okay.
you might be speaking of the temple scroll, right? And documents like that. I think what my studies have shown me on the Dead Sea Scroll group is that there was a group of Zadokite priests, which we know are Sadducees essentially, that they split off from the Orthodox Sadducees over a number of differing beliefs, but they essentially believed they weren't doing the temple correctly and all of this. And so this group of Zadokites broke off, and there was a huge earthquake at Qumran that archaeologists have shown, like this earthquake, like kind of decimated this whole commune out here. And the Essenes had to abandon it, I think sometime around the destruction of the temple. I'm getting the numbers mixed up, but about 30 years later is when we get these documents from this Zadokite group, like the temple scroll, and the datings really corroborate the archaeology as well, that it looks like the Ebionim kind of Jewish Christian maybe group was holding out in Qumran in the Dead Sea Scroll area. And whenever either the destruction of the temple, I think we know Rome came in and kind of cleaned out Qumran as well. They probably had to flee and kind of abandon Qumran for a number of decades. And then you have in Jerusalem, I think around 100 AD or something, these Zadokite priests that split off from the Orthodox Sadducees and say, no, you guys are doing it wrong. We're going to go do our own thing. And they sort of saw Qumran as a place they could maybe take over and rebuild and have establish their commune there. And so a number of scholars like Tabor, Eisenman, I think Kester and others I've read say that a lot of the explanation of these different sectarian texts is like, yeah, you had a number of different groups that lived here, and maybe even a number of sectarian groups that stashed their scrolls here before the destruction of the temple. It's like, that'd be the obvious thing they would do, is like, we got to save our holy scriptures from being burned. Let's go hide them out in these caves with the Essenes.
Yeah, that's really cool. I just know so little about this. Like I spent most of my time in diaspora, and also I studied a lot of other Greco-Roman religions too. So not just like my actual thesis was on other diasporas in antiquity, not even Jewish diasporas. So yeah, it's so interesting. I love listening to this stuff and like listening to Tabor talk, listening to you guys talk, because it's just, yeah, like I've spent woefully not enough time on Qumran. I did go to Qumran once, but I haven't spent enough time with the Dead Sea Scrolls. So it's so cool. Very interesting to hear you guys talk.
It's a behemoth of a subject to study, man. So
it's huge. Yeah, it's its own discipline. Yeah, exactly. Yeah, but no, it's super interesting.
Well, getting back to, I love our little Bible nerd side trails, but
yeah,
kind of
hopefully the audience can follow it all right. But
yeah, hopefully. I mean, if they listen to my content and yours, they probably can.
There you go.
But I want to get back to the deconstruction piece a bit, because one thing I'm curious about, this definitely was true in my case, but how was the reaction from like your family, friends, and community? Was there a reaction? Like, did you kind of slip away quietly and nobody really noticed that you left? Or was it more of a big coming out of like, I don't believe this stuff? I'm always just fascinated in how that part of the deconstruction
that's a good question.
Process goes for people.
Yeah, that's a great question. I probably slunk away quietly. Like I think I did raise it to like my immediate family, like my parents and my siblings. I was actually angry. Like with them, I was just like not angry with them per se, although I probably did have those moments, but I was often like trying to bring things to a head. Like I remember one Easter Sunday, like sitting there and everyone's getting ready for church, and like I've shared on my channel, I don't know why this bugs me so much, but on Easter, Christians do this thing that you're supposed to say like, he is risen, and then you say, he is risen indeed. And like, exactly. And I don't know why that bugs me so much. Like it's pretty innocuous really, but it just like triggers something in me. I don't know, maybe it's like the formula, I don't know what it is, but and I was just mad. And like I was sitting there just like, you're going to church to worship a dead demigod. Like this is so messed up. And like just like lashing out almost. And my kids were there too. Like this is another, we could talk about this. I know you're a father too, but having kids being exposed to this stuff, and be like, this is
Yeah.
messed up. I don't really want my kids exposed to this like death
Yeah.
cult. So anyway, I mean, like, I was angry with my family, but otherwise I slunk off. Like, I really did, because it was a natural progression. I closed up my time at the church. Now, in part, I think it was probably because I was a coward. In part, it was probably also like just a nice natural, like, I didn't need to blow up the world that I was, just kind of let them do their thing, and I was going to go quietly somewhere else. So I actually moved to a new city. I was doing a PhD, so I moved to Toronto. So totally new city, totally new group of people, and I got to reinvent myself, which was a really nice thing at the time too. And then even in that new city, like, I've talked a bit about my wife deconstructed later. Like, we kind of
Oh, wow.
she was raised Catholic, converted through like Campus for Christ, Power to Change,
Wow.
whatever,
So,
at
wait, so you
university.
were married to a Christian wife before you
Yes.
deconstructed, and she made the
Yeah.
swing with you?
Eventually, yeah. I think, like, I don't know, had she been like raised like me in fundamentalism, I don't know if we would have survived it. Like, it's really hard to know,
Yeah.
obviously, what would have happened. But I think the one that, like, she had been raised Catholic and had never, like, she met evangelicals and they were like, well, that one doesn't count. You need to get saved, right? So she's like, okay, I'll convert. And like, I'm not trying to downplay it. It was a real conversion and a real experience for her. And then we did ministry together. So I started to like implode spiritually, and she's like, what the heck is going on here? Like, why is he, why is he going through this? And I've thought a lot, we've talked a lot about it since, but like, our marriage was wrapped up in that. And in
Oh,
being the
yeah.
youth pastors at the church, we were like that couple that people look to as like the example of Christian marriage. And like,
Yep. Yep.
it's all stuff that gives me hives today, but this is the way that evangelicals think, right? It's like the focus on the family, like power couple of like that
Yeah. It's a
we
little
are.
cringy.
It's cringy. It's very cringy. But anyway, so she did come later. So we moved to a new city. I was kind of angry, reinvented myself. We went to like what I call hipster church for a little while, which was a Tim Keller church break off. It was a little more open. Like, I found it really, I really didn't like, I don't know why it made me so angry, but it was like almost like some of what I hate about apologetics today. It was like the feeling of like this veneer of intellectualism. Like, there'd be a Foucault quote on the bulletin, or there'd be like it was really edgy, and like they tried to pretend they were really like forward thinking and creative, and in some ways they were, but then at the same time it was like the same fundamentalist dogma basically underneath it all. Not all of it, but it was very similar. So I was like chafing against that, and I was like, I got to get out of here. So I left at that point. It was a couple of hard, lonely years for her, having this like non-Christian, quote unquote, non-Christian husband, and trying to like walk the line of like going to ladies' Bible
Yeah.
studies and having like, not feeling like she could talk to anybody about it. But eventually she came with me. And it was also really nice for her because she, like, the faith that her parents gave her, especially her mom, who's no longer with us, she gave her that Catholicism, and then she was told that doesn't count, right? And now she's like, well, this is my spirit, like, this is part of my faith. I can go back to that faith that my mom gave me and that I have all these meaningful experiences with. I don't have to throw it out. So anyway, all that to say, this was like a very long answer to your initial question, but I mostly slunk away. I think it's even like there's probably people finding out now that I'm doing this on YouTube because I didn't talk about
Yeah.
it for a
Yeah.
long time.
That still happens
I
to
think,
me, actually.
yeah, that's not a surprise. I think, in part it's like I knew what was going to happen when I started talking about it. I was thinking about this the other day because somebody, I'll keep this very, very vague. I'm not trying to out anybody, but there was somebody who reached out to me who's about to basically lose his job in ministry because he doesn't believe that the Bible's infallible anymore, and there goes the career, right? Like, you're done
Mhm.
in a fundamentalist church. So I was thinking about this in terms of like a lot of like, I think a lot of us self-select into quietness because we know what it costs to speak up, like to say, I no
Oh,
longer
yeah.
believe this. And even subconsciously, like if you think about the ego, like knowing that the people who love me, are they even still going to love me if I don't believe the right things anymore? Are they
Mhm.
even going to, or am I still going to have that relationship? And am I still going to have a community? Am I still going to have maybe a marriage? Not true in my case, but in some people's case. So I think it's like really, it can be really terrifying to actually say what you're thinking out loud and actually deal with the ramifications. So I didn't for a long time. And even like one of my first videos I did, somebody from my old community actually sent me a really hateful email. it was like 5 minutes into it, and I like sort of knew who they were, not really well, but it was like connected to a church that I
Yeah.
knew,
Yeah.
and sent me this email and like, you owe me an explanation kind of thing. And I was like, oh my God, like this is why I didn't say anything for 10 years, because I was
Yeah.
waiting for this gaslighting, attacking,
Mhm.
and,
Heresy hunting.
and then exactly. Yeah. And they sent me, the next day I hadn't answered. The next day sends me a Bible verse about like how I'm going to hell. Just like, oh my God. So I blocked him and whatever. But it's like those people, they've like, when you're trying to leave a system, like you're trying to leave this world that's formed you and that thinks it has a claim to truth, and that think like it's really hard to go from being the insider, or especially like a privileged insider, like a celebrated insider, to like the full-on heretic that all of a sudden
Yeah.
everybody's like, you're the problem, you're the enemy, you're the like. I'm still getting used to that. It's crazy. Like on YouTube and stuff, like I'm still getting used to people saying like, you were never really a Christian, because like I was the world's best Christian for like 20 years, like it's so
Welcome to
weird
the
to be that
club,
person
brother.
on the other side. Yeah. It's weird to be the person on the other side, when
It is.
especially I grew up in a world where I saw people on the other side and I was like, oh, those poor, poor lost souls. Thank God we
Yeah.
have the truth. Anyway, it comes full circle. So,
It always does.
yeah, yeah. So that's my, in a nutshell, like that's my, not in, that wasn't a nutshell. That was more than a nutshell, but that's the
A
story
couple
of kind of
nutshells.
what, a couple nutshells. Yeah. That's the
Well,
story
I'm
of what
glad you
happened.
told that story though, because again, very similar to my experience as well. But differences between us on this one is that my wife didn't make the swing with me. My first
Mm,
wife did not make the swing. She had a
okay.
difficult time,
Okay.
unpacking at the rate that I was unpacking, and
Yeah.
that just led to a clear like line of demarcation. So I'm really glad to hear that that wasn't the case for you and your wife. I think it's very rare that that happens. So
Mm,
congratulations to both of you. And I think what it says about you is that you obviously were not pressuring her to question her beliefs and make the conversion. Like you probably just really took your hands off and allowed her to have her beliefs and just were complacent with your own, right? And I had that approach with my parents, who my dad, full-time pastor his entire life, um,
yeah.
son of a pastor. He had big problems with my deconstruction at first, as you
Mm,
would imagine. But because I never ever tried to have a debate with him or anything, but very much was like hesitant to talk about these subjects with him, it showed him like, wow, my son's not out here like trying to prove people wrong or whatever. Like he's being respectful of my beliefs, and that opened him a little bit. And he tells this story now that is really amazing. But in short, he was watching one of my videos one night and super triggered. And I hate my son using this language. He sounds like such a heretic. This is so embarrassing. And he shut the video off and he said, I heard the voice of the Holy Spirit, is how he put it. And it said basically like, Scott, this is your son. You know your son.
mm,
You know his heart, that he loves me and he's doing what he believes is right. You might be missing some things he's saying. Like watch the video again and put all your judgments aside and hear it as the son whom you love saying these things. And he said, so I finally did that and I got my judgments out of the way. And by the end of the video, he's like, I'm sitting in my bed at midnight watching your video and tears streaming down my face because the
wow.
message of your video rocked me. And it was like, wow, this is beautiful. And he's so right. And that
That's
was
really
the
cool.
first like big crack in the armor. And a couple of years later now, he's like full on Jesus way. Doesn't believe in biblical inerrancy, the rapture, eternal conscious torment, any of that stuff. So I think
Mm,
it says a lot about the way we can actually, what's the phrase I'm thinking of? Like Jesus said, right? When you return good for evil, you heap burning coals on your enemy's head. It's this idea of like you're sucking the life out of their fight energy when you're kind and loving to them. And that's actually what makes them more open to what you have to say versus the let's duke it out. It's like nobody
yeah.
ever leaves a let's duke it out kind of debate feeling like they lost. Everyone always
Yeah.
leaves feeling like, yeah, I was right. But it's the soft approach that works. And so I'm curious if that's kind of the approach you took with your wife.
Maybe. I don't think I did that well, to be honest. I think like in retrospect, I think I was harsher with her than I should have been.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I don't think
We got
like
to
I
give your
wish I had
wife
had
more
the.
credit then.
You got to give her, yeah, she gets the credit for this one. I mean, we had two little kids too, and like so leaving was like probably not an easy option to consider. Like I think our
Yeah.
kids were like maybe like 2 and 3 or something when I started. So it was like there was a lot wrapped up in that. So
Yeah.
I guess basically we stuck with it long enough until we kind of found some. But I mean, in retrospect, I actually really don't feel good about the way I often treated her, or I wasn't like mistreating her, but like I was blowing up in her Vincent, it wasn't even directed at her, but I'd be like,
totally
this
get
is
it.
bullshit. I hate this. And
Yeah,
like, it's not like you are lying or anything, but it's just like, this is what she holds dear and I'm ripping it down,
yeah,
So, yeah, it took us a long time. I'm thankful she deconstructed too. And she's always like, she's got a stronger faith than I have even today. But we definitely can just meet in the middle on it. Like, it's been a really good, in the long run, it's been really good. But yeah, I mean, and I didn't know that about you either. Like, you can definitely see why marriages break up over this too, because it's like, it's huge. It's like the most fundamental thing
the
that we
most.
hold about ourselves. And even the way, like, as evangelicals, you're socialized. I mentioned the focus on the family marriage. Like, you really are socialized to see your marriage as something that God's involved in as well, like this
For sure.
3-part relationship between the two of you and God. So yeah, I mean, it's so, like, there's so much there, and it's so there's just so, yeah, it's so heavy. So my heart goes out to people going through it right now. Like, it's not easy.
I'll never forget a sermon I heard from a Christian pastor guy who came to our high school. I went to a Christian high school, and he was talking about marriage and sexual union in marriage and how it's only approved by God, and celibacy in marriage and all that, celibacy until marriage. And he had this phrase where he was like, Jesus is in your bedroom. And he was like saying that, of like, Jesus is watching, and it was like the creepiest, cringiest thing I'd ever heard. And that was one of I'm 17 years old in high school, senior. And I'm like, what did he just say? I'm like, something's off here. And that was actually the age where my deconstruction sort of began, unbeknownst to me at the time.
Yeah.
But the first, you talked about your moment of like realizing I don't want to be an evangelical. This wasn't my moment of realizing that, but it was the first like crack in the wall. And it was reading Psalm 51, the famous Psalm. And I would read the Bible just voraciously as a Christian kid.
Yeah.
I was so devout in my Christianity, wanted to be a pastor. I wanted to know the Bible backwards and forwards. And I pretty much did. And I was reading my daily devotions and stuff. And I'm reading Psalm 51, where David says, you do not delight in sacrifice, or else I would give it. You do not delight in burnt offerings, but the sacrifices of God are a humble and contrite heart. This sacrifice, O God, you will not despise. And I always hated the blood sacrifice, animal sacrifice stuff in the Bible, and really wished it wasn't true and stuff. But it's like, well, it's in the Old Testament, so it's true, and God wanted it, and okay, I'll accept that. But I didn't like it. And reading this passage, it was like, yeah, that's how I think it should be. Like, God doesn't want this blood sacrifice crap. He wants humility and forgiveness and righteousness. And it's what David is saying. And I remember just thinking the passage was so beautiful, and it really struck me of like, yeah, God, you don't delight in that stuff. You want mercy, compassion, humility. And then I had the thought, but wait, you don't delight in sacrifice. You don't delight in whole burnt offerings. What do I do with Leviticus 15 and all these other passages where you're saying, bring me sacrifices on my altar? I love the smell of burnt offerings. And Yahweh is talking about how great the fat of a calf smells being burnt. And I'm like, I can't square this. You can't have a God that says, I love the smell of burnt offerings. And then David say, you hate the smell of burnt offerings. You don't delight in these things. And I'm like, that seems like an irreconcilable contradiction. But what I did was, I think what most Christians probably do is, well, there's smarter people than me who think it isn't. And so they've got better reasons for thinking it's not. So I'll just gaslight myself and move on from this. And so I think you go through that for a long period of time, usually for most people, picking up more things along the way that don't add up. And you keep throwing them in the bin of, well, I can't explain this, but somebody smarter than me, maybe Wes Huff can explain it. And you have like those justifications for these false beliefs. And at some point, the dam just kind of breaks, and you, like you said, get angry. You're like, I'm so tired of being asked by Christians to check my brain at the door all the time. I don't believe that a God of infinite intelligence would ask me to check my brain at the door for any reason. But a philosophy or religion about the true nature of God would be logically consistent. It would hold up to questioning. It would hold up to scrutiny. And you feel like that's the religion I want. And so the anger is coming from a really good place. You're not just like being some cynical douche or whatever, right? You're genuinely upset that the God that you know and have a relationship with doesn't line up with all these dogmatic beliefs. And so it's no surprise to me, man, that you had trouble concealing that during your, marriage and all of that. I think anybody would. It's an
Hmm.
unavoidable part of the deconstruction that
Yeah.
it's a very psychologically disorienting process to go through.
Hmm.
And so I guess I'd love to finish this conversation talking about, you mentioned Christian apologetics, and I get more and more surprised the more I study the Bible, how so many Christians can justify or hold beliefs that I feel are just clearly logically fallacious. But then you hear apologists, famous apologists, doing videos about these topics, and in my opinion, just giving woefully unsatisfying answers to these big questions. And yet the comment section are full of Christians being like, yeah, this is a great explanation.
Yeah.
And
Yeah.
so I asked myself, like, what's the cognitive dissonance here? Why are so many people willing to hold such fallacies in their belief system and it doesn't bother them like it bothered
Hmm.
you or it bothered me?
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah.
And I think the first thing is that certainty is a hell of a drug, isn't it?
Yeah.
Just
Yeah.
feeling safe about your beliefs it
Yeah.
feels really good. It feels comfortable. And so when you ask people to question their certainties, they're sort of on a subconscious level hearing you asking them to give up their comfortability, their feeling of safety and enter the great unknown. And they're like not willing to do that. And I understand that. And I have a lot of love for Christian fundamentalists. I interact with them every day online and truly love them and know that they mean
I can
well,
imagine. Yeah.
but they're just not at a place for whatever reason where they're willing to question their certainties. So, in your experience being an apologist, like what do you think it is, or if you can even pin it down, of like what is that thing that causes some people to question and go through the whole deconstruction process while other people just kind of resolutely refuse to ask those questions? What do you think
Mm.
makes that difference?
It's such an interesting question. I don't know. I have a couple thoughts. I don't know if I have a really good answer, but like the one thing that's occurred to me a lot, and I think about this all the time, is we need different things. You know, if I think about it like a Maslow's hierarchy of needs,
Mhm.
and I think for some people, the need to belong, maybe the need for certainty, as you say, but like I even think about the need to
Yeah,
belong
that
in a
too.
community, the need to have a place, the need to have people, maybe it's people respect you. I'm not trying to like psychoanalyze apologists, you know. I'm just saying because there was a time in my life when like I chose those needs too, you know, and I had those questions. And there was a short time that I had the questions and I was like, I'm not even going to look at that because you're choosing the other need that you need to take care of, which maybe is like your
Yeah.
place in the community. Maybe it's feeling like you belong. Maybe it's the friendships that I've had or the relationship with the family that I don't want to sacrifice, you know. So at some point for me, the need to be honest became more powerful. And I know like I can already envision what an apologist would say to this. So like, I'm being honest too. You're just
Mhm,
defending what you
mhm.
believe. I'm defending what I believe. I like I I went through that world and I found apologetics. I do some stuff about it on my channel because I find it really dishonest. And I feel like lying to people in the service of like keeping them in the box of orthodoxy doesn't do us any favors. Like I'd rather have a Christianity that we can actually explore all these things and be like, this is like coming back to evangelical belonging. Like the way we construct belonging is like you believe the right things, you get to be in our community.
Right.
And to me, it's like I'd rather have community that you can belong to regardless of what you believe. You know,
Mhm.
like if this is going to be a church, like this is my hypothetical perfect community, like sure, there can be some kind of like, you know, like some kind of ideal around like following the teachings of Jesus or something. I'm describing a very liberal church, but
Yeah, yeah.
at the end of the day, like giving people a way to belong without like necessarily believing the right things and like making people safe to be like, if there comes a day that you don't believe this thing, like you're still part of us. Like we're not going to just kick you out all of a sudden. And I don't think people have that safety in a lot of fundamentalist churches. And I think that's why a
Definitely.
lot of people don't look under that rock because you realize what it's going to cost you. Um, I'm sure you get this too. I get emails from people who are like, I can't talk with this about my wife or my marriage is going to end. I can't
Yeah,
talk with this about
absolutely.
my family because we have a family business and I'm going to get kicked out of it and I won't have a job anymore. Like it's just like or I work
Real
for a Christian
concerns.
organization and I have to keep my mouth shut and like all of these types of things. And like, I don't even judge somebody for that. Like if your livelihood depends on you pretending to toe this line for a little while, like maybe it's not the time for you right now. Like maybe
Yeah.
that is the need that you need to service right now. But yeah, the whole apologetics world, it really, I've talked about this on my channel, but like it really failed me. It created this world of like you can ask any question, you can follow the evidence where it leads. And of course, the unspoken assumption is like, it's going to lead back to all the things you believed
Yeah.
at the beginning.
Yeah.
Like, you've known the truth since you were 7. There's no need to deviate. And, I went and started looking at the evidence and was like, this really isn't as cut and dry as what I wanted it to be. So I came to a place for me, where that honesty won out, the need to be like, I need to be honest about what's actually here. I sound like I'm not trying to set up a war of a false dichotomy between like, you're lying to yourselves and I've looked at the truth.
Yeah,
like,
of course.
I think we all have different competing things in our lives. But it was like coming back to like me as a young man, like that 19-year-old that the church came and said, like, you're called by God to do this. When I walked away from that, I lost my livelihood. I lost my calling. I lost that community that believed that I was called by God to lead them. Like the things that it cost me to do this, it wasn't nothing. Like, it cost a lot. I've had to like have a new career. I've had like all these different things. But I'm so glad I did in retrospect, because like I felt like I could be honest with myself. And that was all at the end of the day, like, I remember, I don't want to mention Jordan Peterson. I'm watching,
he's going through it right now.
Thing.
Yeah.
Oh my God. And like, I've never actually really, I have to be very careful because he's such a polarizing figure. And to be honest, I've actually never liked him that much, but I don't want to go down the rabbit hole of Jordan, but all that to say, there's one thing I heard him say once, and it hit me. And he said, you have no idea the power of just being honest and saying what you actually think, because so few people actually do. And when I heard that, I was just like, geez, like, that's my problem. Like, I'm not honest. I'm like, so when I'm making videos on YouTube, like, I just try to be honest. I'm like, I still like, I explain all the time these videos, like what I believe. And it's like very little, but I like the tradition, and I like, I'm kind of exploring spirituality within this lens of Christianity, as imperfect as it is. And that makes me feel like I'm being honest, and I'm okay with that. But it doesn't make people happy, because they'd rather be like, well, give us orthodoxy, give us something we can hang our hat on, some kind of certainty. And, coming back to it, like our talk about the work you're doing, uncovering the origins of Jesus too, it's like, we have to recognize that there's not always that much certainty in this, like any kind of faith. We're exploring it. We come to things that are convincing to us. We come to believe things that we think we can kind of take and work with, but it's never certainty. And I remember this moment when I'll mention my one Bible verse that was like, I was angry. I was an atheist. And like, there was somebody I knew who was really, really smart guy. I respected him, but was still a Christian. And I remember saying to him, like, how can you still be a part of this? Like, this tradition is such BS. Like, why would you even want to be a part of this? And the Bible verse he quoted to me wasn't the one I expected him to quote. He quoted the verse, I think it's in Micah. He says, like, he has shown you what is good and what the Lord requires of you.
Love
do
that
justice,
verse.
Love mercy, walk humbly with your God. And I remember going on just like, geez, I can get behind that. Like, that's not a terrible way to look at the world. Do justice, love mercy, walk humbly with God. Like, okay, like, I can do that. So that was like the beginning of coming back to wanting to be open to faith again. So,
well, you brought up the fear of losing friends, family, community, positions. That's definitely another big part of it. And the more steeped you are in the church, of course, the harder that is. Being an actual pastor is the toughest probably position to be in, because on one hand, you feel like you're going to let down all your congregants. You love these people. You really care for them. They're going to all hate you. That's a tough pill to swallow. And it was probably like 3 or 4 years of wrestling with that. By the time I was maybe 20, 21, just getting out of college at ORU, I was fully like, I don't believe most Christian theology, but I believe like the very, very core of it. I believe that Jesus showed us the way to God, and I didn't really believe he died for my sins, but I didn't really know what I believed. And I was in this weird limbo. And it wasn't until I was 23 or 24 when I said, oh, look, I can't handle the internal conflict anymore. I feel like I'm upstage leading these songs, just singing lies to people, I've got to be honest, or I can't go to sleep at night anymore. And it wasn't until I got to my breaking point that I said, okay, fine. I'm willing to lose every friend I have, probably all my family, be called a heretic, all this stuff, because I can't live with myself anymore. So I pulled the trigger and just kind of left my church, came out as, non-Christian. And I was absolutely correct. I lost every single friend. It was exactly what I feared, except for my mom, dad, and sister. Everyone else gone from my life, and sending lots of nasty emails, like you said.
Yeah.
But I just, like you said, if you get to the point where being dishonest with yourself is more painful than, staying in a position that doesn't feel honest anymore, then you make the transition. And so there might be
Yeah.
many different reasons why some Christians don't question while others do. It's the ways that the human mind can rationalize its own
Yeah.
beliefs to itself really never
Mhm.
cease to amaze me. And
Yeah.
I'm curious, did you ever catch the debate with Wes, Huff, myself, Cam, and Dr.
Yeah.
Stephen?
I don't know if I watched the initial debate. I watched you guys had done like a recap and played a bunch of sections of it though. But yeah,
Yeah.
I did. I saw parts of it. Yeah.
Okay, so you might remember the only kind of actual part of the debate we got into that we had agreed to debate was when we were getting into the salvation teachings of Jesus. And I basically just kind of raised my chief contention, which is, hey, all of Christianity is predicated on these two pillars, right? Confess Jesus as your personal Lord and Savior, and believe in your heart that God raised him from the dead to pay the debt for your sins. And if you confess
Mhm.
that and believe that, you're going to heaven when you die. And I said, the big problem I have with that is that Jesus never said that. There are no verses in the mouth of Jesus where he says anything close to such a thing of you need to confess XYZ or believe
Mm.
XYZ. Jesus never told people to believe in any certain theology, and definitely never told anyone to confess him as Lord. But over and over and over, when he's asked, how do I attain eternal life? Or, how do I get justified before God? It's repentance, forgiveness, love, service to others. And
Yeah.
so I say,
Sell everything you have.
yeah, sell everything you have, join the
Yeah.
Ebionim.
Give it to the poor. Join
Yeah.
the
And so I said, and they were very quick to deny, oh, we don't believe that. We don't believe it. Just confess and believe. And they understood the logical fallacy there. And so I'm like, oh, this is getting good. Like, I want to hear what they're going to say next. What's the answer then? If it's not confess and believe, because basically they admitted, like, yeah, if somebody just confessed and believed, but it was just like a mental exercise because they're afraid of hell, they're not saved. I said, okay, well, every Christian conversion I've ever seen is you induce somebody into a fear state. You say, hey, look, if you don't join our club or convert to Christianity, you're going to burn in hell forever. And I think it's such an incredibly powerful psychological trick to play on people. It's the false dilemma, right? Is what it's called in philosophy. You set up this false dilemma of, hey, if I'm right and you're wrong, you burn in hell forever. So you might as well just play it safe and believe what I
Yeah.
believe.
Yeah.
It's very effective, right? We know that. I was like, so what's the third thing then? It is confess and believe, but not just confess and believe, as Wes said. What is it? And they said, repent of your sins. I said, okay, so you got to repent and confess and believe. And the next question I wanted to ask, and the moderator quickly was like, okay, let's stop talking about this and move on, which was such a bummer. But what I wanted to ask next was, okay, so what if the opposite scenario happened and somebody just repented of their sins before God? Do they burn in hell forever if they don't confess and believe? And I don't know what they would say, yes or no. But here's the dilemma I find is really tough to wiggle out of this one. Is if you make this false dilemma for people and say, if you don't believe this, you're going to hell, then in my opinion, you have absolutely robbed all free will from that person. It is no longer a free choice. It's now just a wedding proposal with a gun to the bride's temple. It's a totally inauthentic choice because let's face it, going to hell forever isn't a choice that anybody could or would make. Pick any other option, and that's the option someone's going to choose. It is the worst imaginable fate a human being could ever face. So it's automatically not a choice anyone could make. Nobody would ever choose to burn in hell forever for any reason. So now you've just given them really one choice and a threat. And that's not salvation. That's not genuine. And so, do you really want a religion full of psychological captives in that way, Or everyone's just
Yeah.
really
Yeah.
afraid of going to hell. Yeah, we sing
Yeah.
about Jesus, but really we're just fucking grateful we're not going to burn in hell forever. I mean, that really
Yeah.
is kind of how I experienced Christianity. It's this big kind of sigh of relief club. It's like, oh, we all figured out the one right answer to salvation, and thank God we're not going to hell. Let's just hold on
Mm.
to the rapture now. And these are the
Yeah.
kind of ideologies that make people lose taste for Christianity because it starts to show its fruits that there's nothing
Mm.
really substantial here. And
Yeah.
what's substantial, I think, are the salvation teachings of Jesus. And again, the problem is where I was trying to lead that back and forth was, okay, so you believe that salvation is dependent upon something Jesus absolutely never said or alluded to, but it's not solely dependent upon what Jesus absolutely did say over and over and over, which is
Mm.
repent sincerely and God forgives you. Told many parables about this, said it directly multiple times. Peter says it in Acts, Paul says it in Acts. The whole book of Luke is about repenting. And so that's not how you get saved. If you just repent, you're going to hell.
If I can really quickly react to what you were saying, because it's like so much of what you were just saying resonated. I was thinking of like so much of this time we spent manipulating children to believe this. Like, I don't know if your conversion experience came as you were young, but like, even if you're under 18, when adults tell you things, you believe it. And we could probably talk about, I don't know if you probably grew up in rapture culture too, like worried about the end of
Oh,
the
yeah.
world, worry everyone's going to get snatched away and I'm
Any
here.
minute
Like,
now.
so take rapture culture, take like all the messed up stuff around sexual ethics and like purity
Yeah.
culture and all that like nonsense, and then take I don't know, like some of the gender ideology we had, and take like the martyr, I don't know if the martyr obsession, like we're going to be killed for our faith, and
Yeah. Yeah.
like growing up as a Christian kid in the 80s and
Pretty
90s. I was
intense.
90s, but is it crazy? Yeah, I think you're a little younger than I am, but yeah, like this is a lot. And coming back to like, we tell kids, like telling a 4-year-old, you're going to hell unless you pray a prayer. And
Yeah.
when that 4-year-old believes you, you think that means something, when therefore they want to pray a prayer and like, oh, thank God little Jimmy got saved. Like that's messed up. Like I've said, like I have my issues with the Catholic Church, but like looking at my wife, like my wife never officially deconverted Catholicism. Like she just was like, she's still a Catholic. She's still in the registers. It's like, you're in, like you were born and baptized, like you're in forever. And like
Yeah.
I have, again, a lot of issues with the Catholic Church, but the one thing I do like is like, again, coming back to belonging, right? You don't belong
Yeah.
because you believe the right things. You're just here, like you're part of us, and that's okay. And I was thinking as you were saying that about the amount of worship songs that focus on I'm so disgusting. Like we
Yeah.
almost need to keep people in a state of perpetual shame over their
Absolutely.
humanity. And let's be honest, if we're teenagers, like 90% of that was sex, right? Like teenage boys, like
95,
were
bro.
ashamed. 95. Yeah. Like I had an impure thought. Like like, oh God, what, like, so like going and singing these worship songs that perpetuates like, I am such a, disgusting, vile person. And you like saved me. I can't believe it. Like realizing that you need to keep people ashamed of who they are and fundamentally self-hating in order for salvation to mean something. And that's
Yeah.
like what that fundamentalist thing was for me, is like I left and I was like seeing, and I love Richard Rohr. I don't know if you ever listened to Richard
Same.
Rohr,
Love
but
Richard
like,
Rohr.
yeah, love his stuff. Like talking about creation and talking about how like the initial version of creation, like Genesis 1, is like it was good. It was good. And
Yeah.
we have this story about the fall, and like, I could critique that as a historian or whatever, but like the point being is like we look at humanity as evangelicals, we looked at humanity from a position of wickedness fundamentally. Like we're all disgusting, we're all shameful, we're all, and looking at the world and seeing goodness, trying to see the goodness in everything. And I was just I did this interview with Brian McLaren, this guy I really like. He's another kind of
I
Christian
saw that.
writer. Yeah, he's a really cool guy. I really love his stuff. But one of the things I said to him was like the feeling that when I deconstructed and I started to crack the door open again for having some kind of a relationship with faith, whatever that looked like, and it's, even now it's evolving and it's not perfect, but it was like, I say I believe these things about God, that like God belongs to every single human being on the world. And then as an evangelical, I acted like he was ours, and nobody else had any access. If you're in the wrong religion, you prayed the wrong prayer, like, sorry, sucks to be you. Like you don't
Sucks
get
to
God.
suck.
Yeah, exactly. Like, sorry that you were born Muslim, but you have no access to God now unless you convert and join my religion. But like opening up and being like, if the things that we say about God are true, and I'm going to be honest, I have days that I have a lot of doubting days. I identify as an agnostic most days, but the ability to see God in any human being, in any human tradition, in any, like, I could see the divine anywhere, like in, listening listening to your stuff. And it's like, I don't think we agree on everything per se, but it's like, I can see what you're doing. And it speaks to me in that way of like, you're a genuine seeker looking for,
Yeah.
like looking for that divine wherever you find it. I find that it's just such a beautiful thing, like to approach the world as like, unlimited divine potential instead of like a box that I get to protect what's divine, and I get to like tell everyone else, you don't really have it. I have it. You can convert if you want, but otherwise you don't have it. It's like everybody, in moments of weakness, most of us, maybe the hardcore atheists don't, but like most of us cry out to God on the possibility that there's something there, and
Yeah.
we go out into the nature, and most of us, again, I don't know about the hardcore atheists, but like a lot of us are like, could there be something else? Or, we lose somebody. I've lost a few people that I love, and having these moments after they're gone was like, was that something? Like something
Yeah.
just happened? Was that a sign? Maybe it wasn't. Like maybe I'm just my brain again, that cognitive science thing. Like my brain is just going into overdrive. But it's the possibility. Like for me, that's what spirituality is. And like coming back to like, I don't think I believe anything as like a statement of faith, but I think I'm just open to divine possibility. Like I'm not a cultural Christian, in that a lot of people say like, oh, you're just a cultural Christian. I do like Christianity. But it's, for me, it's like Christianity is like the language that I use for whatever that ultimate reality is. It's probably imperfect. It's messed up. It's like, as we've talked about, it's conditioned by history. It's like, there's so many problems with it, but it's my language for the divine. And to me, that's why I still practice. So that's kind of like what I believe, without saying that I believe anything. So it doesn't make very many people happy, but it makes me happy. Like it's
I
just
love it.
it's been a great way to recapture spirituality without needing the box.
Yeah. I think you said in our email thread, you sort of identify as like a Christian universalist or something like that.
I I have absolutely no beliefs about salvation. Like this is like my like, maybe it's my weakness or my Achilles heel. If if a theologian really came for me, I'd probably fall apart. But like, yeah, I have no real beliefs about salvation other than like, if there's a God, God will sort it out. And like, I don't think that
Yeah.
needs to even bother me. I don't know why that needs to be such a part of my life. Like, I'm just going to do justice, love mercy, walk humbly with God, and like leave the rest up to God, whatever that, whoever that is.
I mean, I think that's
Yeah.
the perfect soteriology. And
That's all I got. Yeah.
I share it with you, man. Like the word save to me, I use it so incredibly loosely because what I really mean when I say salvation is like salvation from sin and suffering and being selfish and living from ego. Like I actually have a book coming out about the ego called The Three
Oh,
Beliefs of
nice.
Ego in August.
Cool.
So I do a lot
Congratulations.
of
That's really cool.
teaching about the ego and
Yeah.
the way it drives human thought and decisions, and really the three beliefs of the ego, which is this idea that every human being kind of comes pre-packaged with these beliefs, is the belief in lack, which is like, I'm not enough, I'm not good enough, I'm not lovable enough, something like that. There's a feeling that something's missing inside of me, and I got to go figure out what that is. And that leads
Yeah.
to the second belief, which is the belief in external happiness or outcome happiness, that
Yeah.
whatever it is that I'm missing, it's out there in the world somewhere. And if I chase and seek enough pleasure, fame, fortune somewhere, I'll find it and I'll finally be happy.
Mm.
That's the
Mm.
second belief, which kind of gets you on the ego's rat race, right?
Yeah.
And the third belief is just that you are separate from God and you have to be in control of your life. And so the book is about questioning those three beliefs and finding salvation from those beliefs. So it isn't some kind of legal transaction the way that Protestantism paints it,
Mm.
but an unfolding understanding of the divine that sort of rescues you from the psychological consequences of living in shame, as you said, or fear of
Yeah.
God and all these things that Christianity instills. So I think salvation is just a matter of the mind. It's like I'm saving my mind from these destructive, distorted beliefs that cause a lot of suffering. And I think that's
Yeah.
what the human experience is all about personally, is we're these infinite, eternal beings, souls, whatever you want to call us, that come from the divine. And we're here to learn and grow and evolve, probably over countless lifetimes. And this is just one of them. So we shouldn't take everything so damn seriously, first of all, the way that
Mm.
Christianity does, where it's like, look, this is your one and only shot. If you get it wrong, you're fucked forever. I
Mm.
think that's definitely not a healthy psychological teaching to give to children, let alone adults. But
Yeah.
it's also not what Jesus taught. And so salvation to me, like even just the idea of God actually has become so simplified from when I was a Christian, in that I used to think that God was like a monolithic sort of being out there with like his own mind and separate from my mind. And he has his own will, I have my will. And I've come into more of this understanding of oneness. And it really comes from the Bible, from the story of Moses in Exodus, where he meets God at the burning bush. And the famous "I am that I am, I will be what I will be" is the way that God announces itself. And it's like, that's a definition of God I can really get behind, is that God is the first person in the present tense, the I am. It's like the way that I know I exist, because everybody knows themselves. Every single sentient being, right, knows themselves as the first person. You never know yourself as the second person, right? I never say, you are hungry when I'm hungry. I say, I'm hungry. And you never know yourself outside of the present moment. It's always now. You don't have past or future. You just have now. So it's this kind of like eternal conscious principle, if you like that phraseology. That's what God is. God is the awareness, the consciousness by which we know ourselves, the ground of being, as per Meister Eckhart. And I think that's just a definition you can't lose from, because I've even had conversations with atheists about this idea of like, what if God's just this kind of ground of being, you know? And they're like, oh yeah, like I could rock with that.
Yeah, I can get
what they're rejecting is the monolithic bearded man in the sky kind of image. And it's like, I'm an atheist to that God.
Yeah, that's cool. I like, as you were saying that, I'm sure you've heard this because if you love Richard Rohr too, but Richard Rohr tells this one story, and I think he says he got it from like a Jewish friend of his, but he was talking about the divine name and how the divine name, if you actually listen to it, is Yahweh, Yahweh. It's like, it's the breath. And when he said that, I was like, holy shit, that's cool. Like, yeah. So it's just like rethinking it as like the name for a being out there is, it's like, it's actually the breath in our body. Like, so what he says is like, Yahweh will be the first thing. It's the first thing. I'm sorry, I'm saying the divine name. I apologize for, I could say Hashem, but so Hashem will be the first thing you say when you take your first breath. And at the end of your life, it'll be the last thing you say, you know, that like the name of God is always on your lips. And like, that's such a cool principle. Like, I really like that. So,
see, that's mystical Christianity. And that's a brand of Christianity you can sink your teeth into, and it's enjoyable. It's rich. You're interested in going deeper. Whereas fundamentalist Christianity is kind of like, okay, you've arrived. You've got all the right answers. You believe all the correct things. You're going to heaven. Case closed. Nothing left to do really, other than attend church and give us your tithes and offerings.
And
it's
the ego too,
right?
What's that? And the ego of it all, like you're talking about, like, I'm assuming you had similar experience to me, is like, I, you know, as a man, somewhat well-spoken, you know, somewhat okay looking, which I literally had somebody tell me once, like, you're good looking and God's given you that. Like, I'm not saying I'm good looking. This is a whole other conversation. But the point is like, that ego that gets wrapped up even in my own calling as a, you know, evangelical pastor, or as like, as the one who's got God right. Like, it's all about ego. Like, there's so much ego in that. And to lay that aside and be like, I'm not the guy with all the answers, you know, I'm the searcher. Like, I'm not the one who's here to tell everyone else, like, I've found it. I'm looking for maybe looking for the pearl of great price. I don't know. Like, I'm still exploring this. And to me, once the tradition stopped, and I still identify as a Christian in like a modern sense. So I still put myself in that Christian tradition, but I would point to like amazing people like Richard Rohr, like Paul Tillich, or like different, I was just John Hick. I was just talking about him the other day because he was William Lane Craig's doctoral supervisor, but he was an amazing guy. So like, this tradition the mystical tradition is in Christianity, you know? So for me, like, Christianity has become the place that I search for, like, that I search, you know, or the place that I don't like searching. I'm like looking for the right answer. I'm just exploring, like, like just kind of having fun with it, and like seeing what, like, the truth that is in this tradition. And I don't think it's the only truth. I don't think it's the only tradition, but it's really meaningful to me. And that's been so special, rediscovering that. And I don't know if I could have been sustained. I don't know about you. I don't think I could have been sustained on a lifetime of like being the guy with all the answers, who knows everything, ego, like center of the church, you know, like the evangelical celebrity pastor bullshit. Like, it's like, you're the guy on the stage who knows it all. And like, I don't know, there's something human in that. Like, humans look for leaders, and like, that's, you know, I guess part of life, I guess. But I don't know, like, laying that ego aside and being like, I'm just exploring, I'm just playing in this tradition. It's almost like a sandbox I get to play in and like think about ideas and explore the history, whatever. Like, that's been so much more life-giving to me. So it means more to me now than it ever did as a fundamentalist. I don't have any more answers.
Yeah, it's definitely a very uncomfortable position, at least to be put in, to be the person everyone looks up to with all the right
Yeah.
answers, especially when you're freaking 23 years old or whatever. You're
Yes,
like,
I was
guys,
young.
I just
Yeah.
got here. Like, I definitely don't have all
Yeah.
the answers yet.
Yeah. Oh my God. Yeah. I like, I'll always regret being that 20-year-old who converted children. I just like, I thought I was doing the right thing, but and I think in the kids who are in my youth group, they'll talk about it today. Maybe I don't keep in contact with many of them anymore. I've talked to a few of them since, but I hope I was like an influence for good on them, notwithstanding
Oh, I have no
that
doubt you were.
world. But like, God help me if I ever go back to that world that I'm trying to convert children to, it's just like,
Yeah.
there's something bigger here. That's like, I think that's what we're both trying to get at, even if from different perspectives. It's like, there's a bigger truth to explore here than just like that fundamentalist worldview. So, or the
Yeah.
book with all the answers. Yeah.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, that was one of my struggles too as a Christian, was I lived with pretty extreme guilt over the fact that I'd never made a single convert. And I was told to all the time, if you're a good Christian, you make disciples. And I just
Wow.
couldn't get myself to have this weird, uncomfortable, cringy conversation with strangers of like, if you died today, do you know where you're going to go? The whole
Yeah.
not Ken Ham, what's his name? The Australian guy, Ray Comfort.
I don't. Oh, okay. I was like, I don't know. Australian
Ray
guy.
Comfort
Yeah.
and Kirk Cameron. That was like
Oh yeah, Kirk Cameron. Yeah.
the tried and true apologist approach to conversion, was like kind of their model. But I couldn't do
Yeah.
it. It was just too difficult. I felt weird about it. And now I'm looking back very grateful.
No, I was gonna say that, it's funny, like the first time I did convert people. And I remember the first time I converted somebody, I was like 15. I was like a junior counselor at a camp.
Wow.
And we had done the thing. And like this kid, like my camper came to me and was like, I want to become a Christian. I was like, yes, this is what I've trained for. Like, I'm ready. Let's do it. And I led him through like the sinner's prayer. We did this thing. And he looks up at me and he's like, that's it. It's like, nothing happened. And I was like, well, no, you're a Christian now. Congratulations.
Wow.
And he
Don't
started
you feel it?
crying. Yeah. And he started bawling. He's like, it didn't work. Nothing happened. It didn't work. And he started like crying. And I was like, oh my gosh. I'm like, I went and talked to the mentors about it at camp. And they're like, well, sometimes that, but like, it was
Wow.
weird to me, like how anticlimactic it was. It was supposed to be this great moment. And I was like, I feel like I there were other better ones after that. I think that like people were converted and I was a part of it, but it was just so anticlimactic in terms of like, this should be
Yeah.
the thing. And instead it's like, here's this kid who all of a sudden now has this like serious problem in his heart. And I maybe failed him. Maybe it didn't take, I don't know, maybe anyway.
Yeah. Wow.
So it was like, even that part of that world is so complicated.
Yeah. It sounds like he maybe, he was hoping or expecting that his inner guilt would go away or whatever.
Yeah.
This transformation would occur, and he felt no differently and
Yeah.
thought, well, that clearly didn't work. And I
He
think
wasn't
that's
very old
probably,
either. He was maybe 8 or 9, but yeah. And
oh
that
gosh.
notch on my belt didn't feel as good when he had that much doubt, right? I was like, this was supposed to be a magical moment anyway.
We'll put like a
I did
stripe
have
on
like,
your belt, not a full notch.
exactly.
But yeah, you get some credit.
I
in
should be
heaven.
careful because I think notch on your belt is it's terminology for like sexual partners or
I
something.
think it is too. Yeah.
Okay, well, that's not what I'm trying to say. But anyway.
We're definitely not talking about that.
Yeah, but I have heard a notch on your spiritual belt as being like how many
Notch
people
on your
led to the
bedpost is
Lord,
the,
led to the Lord. Yeah, notch on your bedpost is the other one.
Yeah.
So anyway, it's like I hope good things for those people in my past, and like it came from a good place when I was trying to convert people, and I did convert kids, and I hope I loved them. I hope I gave them the love and support that they needed as a youth pastor, even though I was trying to convert them. But yeah, it's something I live with. Like, it's just, and it's funny seeing, you were talking about angry people in Instagram comments, and I see so much of myself. I don't know if you find that. Like,
absolutely.
I see myself in the angry commenters. Like, that was me. I was just as mad. I was just as like, somebody warned me about these heretics like Aaron who are out there like trying to deconvert people and questioning the gospel. And it's like, I was the most angry right before I deconstructed. So like, when I see angry people, I'm like, watch out. You might be on the verge. Like, you wouldn't be this angry if you were just so confident in what you believe.
Oh, that's such a great point. I mean, it's definitely true that the more cognitive dissonance you have, the angrier you're going to be. It's like an agitation in the system, and it doesn't feel good to live with that kind of dissonance. But also, this is just a psychological rule of any topic anywhere. But the more intensely and the more anger that someone uses to assert their beliefs shows how weak they actually believe it is, right? It's a psychological compensation kind of tactic,
Yeah.
that the
Yeah.
more you kind of deep down really know that your beliefs are pretty fragile and easily questioned, the more like dogmatically and angrily you have to assert them and
Yeah.
like threaten people about them, because you
Yeah.
don't have substance there that defends itself.
Yeah. It's a
And so it
defense
is
mechanism.
when you catch these kinds of psychological events that are happening in people's minds, because you've been through the process and you used to be angry and stuff, it just makes sense. And you're like, yeah, I get why you're angry. And I get why you
Yeah.
think I'm a
Yeah.
heretic. And it just
Yeah.
inspires that Christ like compassion and forgiveness where I don't have anything against you, man.
Yeah. It's like, that's the weird thing, isn't it? Like deconstructing and then needing to be the one who's like Jesus, I guess, in that way. Like having that, like, yeah, like I get it. I have to be, otherwise I would drive myself crazy. I've done a few videos that are a little bit ranty, and sometimes that feels good to
Yeah.
massage the ego that way. But like you can't live a lifetime being angry at people who are angry with you. Like you have to just be like, I'm doing my thing. I'm sorry you don't get it, but I hope there comes a day when you will. Like I hope there will be a
Yeah.
day not long from now, maybe, when you'll be like, I thought that guy was a heretic, but I'm in a place in my life where I need to hear what he has to say. That's like,
Yep.
it's kind of the best I can hope for.
Well, that's something I think about pretty regularly in my interactions with people. Is I would be shocked if this person I'm talking to doesn't either radically change what they believe or fully like deconstruct at some point in their life, because we live in this new age, right? Where we've got internet, social media,
Yeah.
especially now
Yeah.
AI with ChatGPT. And
Yeah.
number one, there's so much more awareness in people's face, because now Christians can't really hide in their bubble worlds anymore and keep to themselves, because they just go on YouTube and they're watching Alex O'Connor deconstructing Christianity in 2 seconds. And
Yeah.
you and me and all the other people that are questioning these things and live debates. And all of a sudden, the Christian world is like massively exposed to alternative ideas, even
Yeah.
alternative Christian ideas like mysticism. And you're going to get
Yeah.
a lot of people branching off now because of that. And recent studies I looked at showed that between, I think, 2006 and 2025, so just under 2 decades, there's been like a 13% decline in Christian identification in America.
Yeah.
So from
Yeah.
like 76% to 63% just in like 20 years. And so you extrapolate that and you're like, oh, okay, so fundamentalism might have like 50 years left, basically.
Yeah.
I just
Yeah.
think it's not avoidable anymore to stay in a bubble
No, it's
world.
not.
You have to try
Yeah.
really hard. And so I think most of these people are angry because they're getting inundated with alternative beliefs so much that even
Yeah.
just 10 years ago, you really didn't
Yeah.
get that kind of exposure.
Yeah. Yeah. It's I want to use the word epidemic for deconstruction, but that has negative connotations, because I'm
Yeah.
not trying to say it's
A
a sickness,
pandemic of
but like
destruction. Yeah.
a pandemic of deconstruction. But it's everywhere. Like I can't turn on, and like it's weird to me, and like it kind of speaks to that moment that we grew up in the 90s that I talked about. Like
Mhm.
it was that moment of so many shared beliefs, like different evangelical churches, but sort of a thread running through them all, the rapture and martyrdom and sexual
Yeah.
morality and stuff like that. um and it's wild that like I can make a video sitting in Canada and somebody in Texas is like, I know exactly what he's talking about. I
Yeah,
felt that
totally.
exact same thing. It's like, this is wild that we are all pushing back against the same system. And I think like I see people on YouTube freaking out about deconstruction. And I see these people who are like, it's coming for your church. What can you do to prepare? And it's like, you
Yeah.
can't. Like, you're
You
done.
can't.
There are smart kids who are going to ask questions. And like, if you aren't willing to back off of fundamentalism, like you'll get some of them. Some of them are going to stay, I bet you. But like, deconstruction is going to keep happening. And it's like, I like very few of the people I meet chose deconstruction. Like it's not people who weren't really
I never
saved.
met
It's not people who
anybody.
are
Yeah.
going, yeah, like it's not people who are going, look, it's people who are like, I'm smart, I've thought about this, and there's something not quite right in the things I'm being told. And like so many different reasons. Like a lot of people I know are deconstructing. A lot of women, like in middle age, are deconstructing, being like, I was told I had to be this like perfectly chaste woman and like have no
Yeah.
sexuality up until I turned, got married, and then I was supposed to turn it on and be like a freak, a lady in the street, but a
Freak
freak in
show.
the bed
Yeah.
or something. Yeah. And like, and then also, but then also like, I'm not supposed to have any identity except for like as a wife and a mother, and like the complementarian crap that's still out there, and like
Yeah.
my job is to support my husband, and like just like an avalanche of like, so there's people deconstructing for that reason, then there's people like me looking at the Bible and being like, this isn't true, we need to, so it's just, it's gonna keep happening. And I think
Yep.
I'm really excited by conversations like we're having, like new ways to engage with this tradition that are life-giving to people, instead of being like, here's the rapture culture from the 1990s, which by the way was BS to begin with, absolute nonsense, totally made up. Even if you want to talk about biblical, like the rapture culture was not biblical, it was nonsense. Like even if
Complete
I believed in
nonsense.
that worldview, like the rapture anyway, these roadmaps of the end of the age, I don't know if you had this, we had like these images of like, this is what's going to happen, and then the
Oh
great
yeah.
white throne
Here's where
judgment,
we
and then
are.
the,
And yeah.
exactly, yeah, here's where you are. Like,
Yeah.
oh my God, it was such a weird time to be alive. But like people don't want that. Like that's not, I don't know, like our generation is going to, and also like once you predict the end of the world, like sooner or later it needs to happen if you're going to keep predicting it, which is the problem, I think the problem Paul ran into as well. But
Yeah.
yeah, I mean, it's just like, I think we're living at a really exciting time if Christianity can reinvent itself, and like we can have these communities full of people exploring these traditions for different reasons than because it's right and everybody else is wrong. Or people can dive into fundamentalism and pray that it holds out. I think a lot of fundamentalists, like as the mainline churches were emptying out, a lot of fundamentalists were like, there you go. Like that's why the Anglicans or the I'm trying to think of like some of the mainline. We in Canada we have slightly different denominations. So I'm thinking like United Methodist, that'd be a mainline. Like I said Anglican already. Like anyways, like as these mainline churches are struggling to get numbers, a lot of evangelicals were like, well, it's because you're turning your back on the truth and you need to teach the gospel, and that but now evangelical churches, as you said, are like emptying out too. And it's like, well, maybe it wasn't just because we were preaching the truth, maybe there's something different happening here. So anyway, that's my soapbox. But I'm excited by the possibilities
Yeah.
for different ways to be spiritual, different ways to be Christian that aren't that way, the
Same, man.
Jesus
I
way,
mean,
maybe. Yeah.
you're speaking my language, brother, because that's why we started this podcast. That's why I started the Jesus Way, is because I wanted to give, it's just such a huge demographic right now of people that are former Christians, questioning Christians, people that are just on the outskirts, disenfranchised Christians who love Jesus, even love the Bible, but they keep being told this is the only one way you can have those things, is through our belief
Yeah.
system. And I want to
Yeah.
just give people permission to say, yeah, you can love Jesus and follow Jesus and love the Bible and follow the Bible without checking your brain at the door. You can acknowledge this is a book written by humans. Of course, it does contain errors and contradictions in it, like every other ancient book. That's not what makes this book valuable, is that it has no errors because it was dropped out of heaven.
Mm.
It's almost
Yeah.
like if I was in an arranged marriage and I am only with my wife because I was arranged to be with her for political reasons, and I'm just like, I don't even love this woman, and I divorce her and leave. And then I'm away from her for a while and I go, she was very sweet and kind and genuine. And I'm thinking about her now from all the good qualities that I couldn't see when I was in the arranged marriage because I was too upset about the arrangement. And now I'm like, I actually kind of think she might be worth being married to. And I return back to her and we actually fall in love. And now we get married again for good reasons.
Yeah.
To me, it's kind of like that. It's like, hey, you were brought up in this religion. You were taught with fear and judgment. You got to believe these things. You're going to hell. So you were kind of put in a position where you had no other option. Your whole
Mhm.
community and culture was telling you this. And it's very terrifying to tell a child such things. So it makes sense that you rejected that. But does that mean there's nothing good here? There's no gold to be rescued? Of course not. And so, what we want to do with the Jesus Way is show people here's a way you can follow Jesus that's logically consistent, metaphysically, morally consistent, and you don't have to hold beliefs that cause cognitive dissonance anymore. You can question everything that doesn't make sense, and you'll still arrive at time tested truths. These are universal spiritual principles that the Bible teaches, Jesus taught, and you can follow those teachings. And that's a brand of Christianity that I think excites a lot of people because, to your point, like people do want a form, a structure, a community to belong to. And that's very good because if there is a God that is based in logic, like if God is the most logical being in the universe, if God is the most loving being in the universe, if God is the most rational being in the universe, every Christian would say he is, yeah, then we can take a deep sigh of relief and say, okay, if it doesn't make sense to me that I would never torture my kids in hell forever, I can rest at ease knowing God definitely wouldn't do that. We can logically walk through these beliefs for people and help them deconstruct in a healthy way. Because if you're watching this right now, if you watch CJ's channel, there's good likelihood that you're in a deconstruction phase and you're looking for these kinds of satisfying answers. And I think the first thing to say to somebody like that is, congratulations on being honest with yourself and being willing to ask tough questions that you're probably being highly discouraged from asking. CJ and I both know how hard that is. But there is a huge growing community online. And I think very soon we might even see churches, spiritual centers popping up that are kind of teaching this brand of Christianity of, look, we're just here to love our neighbor and love God with all our heart. The stuff Jesus said and actually taught. And I think you're going to see an explosion of that type of Christianity. I really do. But we're just kind of in the beginning phases of it right now because there is this kind of mass exodus happening from fundamentalism. And so I guess we'll close with this question of, what would you say, CJ, being somebody that's been through not only an incredible amount of Christian education, but also deconstruction? What if there's one piece of advice or perspective you would offer to somebody who might be in that kind of tough position we've been talking about today of secretly questioning, they want to come out of the closet, but there's a lot of fear there and all these kinds of existential things that come up? Is there any tip or perspective you would offer to somebody that's in the midst of their deconstruction process?
My God, I wish I had just like a little nugget of wisdom. There's so much, and then there's like, I think people. Well, okay, let's look inward for a minute. Like, I think somebody going through that process, like, it's not Satan, it's not, like it's something in you being honest, and
Yeah.
like that's a beautiful thing to begin with. I think find somebody, again, I mentioned Brian McLaren. He said this when I asked him this actually same question. He said, like, find one person you can be honest with, find one person you can express if you can. And you know what, that person might be on the internet. That person might be in your community, like that person might be, I mean, your community, not like your home community, but like that person might be, in a virtual community or, Discord server or something, but like find one person to talk to about it. I think that makes a big difference. And then I think like there's just so much self-kindness required to take any journey back to faith, and being honest with like what moves you, being honest with like what has scarred you, because the scars stay forever. They don't just disappear. Like I'm still like, I was just saying this to my wife the other day, but it was like, I still struggle to talk about this. I really do. And a big part of it is because like all of the language is completely fucked. Like everything I learned how to say about God has baggage. So like, it's really hard for me to talk about spirituality because if I say like, well, God is love, like that has baggage, if I say
totally.
like anything, like God, all truth is God's truth, like that has baggage. So like
The word God has
anything that
baggage.
the word God, yeah, exactly. So I think it's like a combination of like find people to walk through. You don't need to go through it alone. Like find people to go with you. Be honest with yourself. And then just keep an open mind. Like you've found a lot. I know you've also like benefited a lot from like some Eastern philosophies, I think. Like, is that right? Like from what I've gathered, like so like you never really know where, like one of the beautiful things about taking those blinders off is like, maybe there's a reason why maybe Buddhism does appeal to me in a way that Christianity can't, not because like one's more true than the other, but, or, maybe there may be universal truths in each one, but because I'm so damaged by one, I can't get value from it anymore. Like just be honest and open with yourself about what you need. And I hope like come to a place where you can see it as an exploration, but like it takes time. That would be the real nugget. It takes time. Like it's not something that happens in a week. It's been 15 years for me. And like, I only started talking about it on the internet like 6 months ago. So it takes a lot of time. Like just give yourself the permission and patience to go through it. And it's part of life.
Yeah, it really is. I mean, have you ever heard of a man named Bishop Carlton Pearson?
I don't think so. No.
He's an African-American, super famous Pentecostal preacher from the late 70s, 80s, 90s. And he famously came out and said he didn't believe God sent people to hell anymore. And he's like, I just can't reckon a loving God that would allow that to happen. And he was like, I mean, he was the guy in evangelicalism in those days. He was like packing out stadiums. He went to Oral Roberts University as well. And then he got ostracized and labeled and all of that. But he said something really profound on a podcast I listened to a couple of years ago. And he was asked about, do you still have doubts, or does that religious voice still creep in for you at all? And he said, yeah, it does. I still do hear that voice, kind of to your point. But he said, but I wouldn't change it because it keeps me very, very sharp. And it reminds me of the kinds of beliefs I never want to give my attention to again. When those old dogmatic ideas of God being this wrathful, jealous, petty, vengeful deity who's coming for me after death, when that view of God comes up, I just say thank you to God that you're not like that. And he said, it keeps me humble and keeps me grateful. And I'm like, wow, that's such a great way of looking at deconstruction, is that, you know what? Maybe you don't ever stop hearing that voice. Maybe there isn't some final freedom where the old Christian dogmatism doesn't still creep in every now and then and make you question, are you going to go to hell when you die? And maybe that voice doesn't completely dissolve in this lifetime. Maybe that's okay, because maybe it inspires you to help others who are stuck there. It keeps you compassionate. It keeps you empathetic. And it keeps you grateful, knowing that that's not true, that there isn't an angry, vengeful deity that's looking to send people to hell if they don't believe the right things, but that God maybe is love, even though that term has Christian baggage to it. I think the unifying idea we all agree with is love, is that love is the highest sort of meaning in life. And if God is anything, 1 John 4:8, God is love. And if you can start there, you can have a real authentic spirituality, I think, and faith in God in that way. So I appreciate so much, man, everything you've shared and just being so open about your deconstruction process. Let the audience know where they can find you or what you've got going on. Obviously, your YouTube channel, we'll link that below, but anything else you want to plug before we close?
Well, yeah, it's really just my YouTube channel at this point. I've started doing some writing. I may write a book because it's one way I process through writing.
Nice.
So there may be a book to watch out for, but there's nothing to plug right now other than like the first chapter that's on my hard drive. Yeah, you can find me on YouTube. That's the only place I am right now. But my handle is weirdly See Johnny Run, which doesn't make sense. But
yeah, it was tough to find you on Instagram.
Sorry, my name is. I should change it. My name is CJ Cornthwaite. Hopefully, you'll find me too. But I did everything wrong starting my YouTube channel because I didn't know anybody was going to watch. So search for CJ Cornthwaite. Spelling's down below because it's also hard to spell. It's a double whammy of like internet incognito mode. But yeah, you'll find me there sooner or later. Yeah.
Well, you're clearly having success, brother, even despite doing everything wrong. So that says a lot about the content you're putting out.
Thank you very much. I appreciate that. And right back at you. I appreciate the content you're making too. I think I said this before we went on the air, that like you started popping up in my Instagram feed before I ever thought about doing this myself. So I appreciate what you're doing, and I've benefited from it for a long time.
Well, thank you, brother. I think that was definitely the universe putting some breadcrumb trails in your path.
There you go.
Of what lied ahead.
There you go. Yeah.
So thank you again, brother. Thank you, everyone, for watching this episode. And if you are in the deconstruction process or questioning, former Christian, anywhere in that zone, I hope today's episode really blessed you and gave you some new perspectives and tools that you can use in your own deconstruction process, as we'll continue to do. And so as always, as you know, love God, love people. That's the Jesus way. And we'll see you on the next episode. Peace and love.